Aniara by Harry Martinson. The first 29 of 103 total cantos of this extraordinary novel-length science fiction narrative poem were published in the collection entitled Cikada in 1953 under the title The Song of Doris and Mima, and in the author's native Swedish language. It was then published with the title Aniara, A Review of Man in Time and Space in 1956. The first translation to English came in 1963 by Hugh MacDiarmid and E. Harley Schubert, and that version was republished again in 1964 and 1976. A second translation from Stephen Klass and Leif Sjöberg came in 1999. The first translation is what will be read today. The work inspired an opera by fellow Swede Karl-Birger Blomdahl in 1959, as well as a cosmic horror film in 2018, a Danish-Swedish co-production which, although having a disappointing set design and lacking the magic and mythical references and atmosphere of the narrative poem, does have one of the most fantastic final scenes in cinematic history. Harry Martinson was never afterward able to live up to the standard set by this great work, and the resultant pressure and criticism drove him to a despairing depression for which he was institutionalized. It was during this time that he died by applying a pair of scissors to his abdomen in 1978 at the age of 73. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1974, along with Eyvind Johnson, for his writings that, quote, catch the dewdrop and reflect the cosmos, end quote. This reading is dedicated to the author. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. A brief reader's introduction. During the initial recording, I spoke the number of each new canto, but ultimately decided to omit them, being that their frequency, which is every few paragraphs, felt too intrusive to the broader flow. Also, you will hear words and terms contrived by the author for this work, sometimes utterly invented, sometimes created by combining words from varying languages or dialects, and sometimes simply inspired by them. The author provides a glossary for all such instances, which will be included here in the description box. The following introduction from the first English translation in 1963 contains a few heavy spoilers, so anyone wishing to skip to the story is encouraged to find the timestamp for it in the description box. However, if choosing to do this, I also encourage you to return to the introduction after experiencing Aniara, as it is extremely insightful regarding the themes that fascinated the author, here and throughout his career. Introduction by Dr. Tord Hall, Reader of Mathematics at Uppsala University. The poem you are going to read is about mankind, and thus appeals directly to the imagination. But since both the narrative and the scenes have a highly technical background, a brief survey of the author's scientific thought may make it easier to follow Aniara and her passengers on their journey. Aniara had long challenged the author's imagination, although it was not published until 1956. From Martinson's first volume of poetry, Ghost Ship, 1929, onwards, a cosmic trend can be discerned in his works. Occasional articles and poems during the 30s again revealed his deep interest in science, even if his first consistent efforts in the new style did not bear fruit until 1953 with the publication of Cikada, which contained the first 29 songs in Aniara. A shortened version of the epic, in libretto form, was adapted in 1959 for the opera of the same name. The 102 songs of Aniara form a symbolic poem about our own age, and the symbols have been taken from modern science. The work is not only exciting as a technical saga, but also as a folk tale in which the moral story of technical exploits is entertainingly spiced in order to make it more palatable. The Goldonda, Aniara, with 8,000 emigrants on board, plies to and fro between the radiation-poisoned Earth and Mars. The takeoff is achieved, not as in the days of Icarus, nor as in our own time by means of stage rockets, but as may conceivably occur in the far distant future, the future in which Harry Martinson has set his plot in order to obtain a poetic distance from the present. The Goldonda is towed up by gyrospinners towards the zenith's light, quote, where powerful magnetrines annul Earth's pull, end quote. The anti-gravitational field thus engendered outweighs the force of gravitation, and Aniara, contained in a kind of magnetic bottle, glides up through space like an air bubble through water. During one of her routine journeys, the Goldonda runs into trouble, almost colliding with a previously undiscovered asteroid, Hondo. She saves herself by making a sudden swerve. Further complications arise in the form of meteors and other space gravel, and Aniara, with her rudder jammed, thunders on in the direction of the distant Lyra, poetry's own constellation, right out of the circle of planets, into the void. Quote, thus it was when the solar system closed its gateway of purest crystal and cut off the spaceship Aniara from all the associations and promises of the sun. End quote. The pilots, the leaders on board, soon realize that there is no way back, and gradually the terrifying news spreads to the unsuspecting passengers. After a period of panic and desperation, they resign themselves to their fate. Life goes on as usual, and the all-night vigil of midsummer is kept, although no sun rises. Many seek consolation in escapist reveries. These dreams are conjured forth by the Mima, and the poet himself, having taken over the role of priest, quote, looks after the Mima, calms the emigrants, and livens them with pictures from far distance. End quote. One may pause here to consider some of the changes which have taken place in the scientific view of the world during this century, and what new possibilities of expression they have made available to the poet. The accepted concept of cause and effect has been challenged by Planck and Bohr, and by the radioactive decay. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle would appear to exclude determinism as defined in classical physics. Meanwhile, Einstein's formula of 1905, showing the equivalence of mass and energy, an atom is as unsubstantial as a ray of light, has shattered the old, robust concept of matter. And de Broglie's wave theory of matter emphasizes still further the fundamentally dreamlike character of the material world. A lump of lead is woven of, quote, such stuff as dreams are made of, end quote. The mechanical 19th century model of the universe has vanished, borne away in the smoke wreaths of mathematical symbols. The physicist of today does not think according to a given model, but instead employs abstract mathematical concepts such as tensors, matrices, and potentials. These concepts have no physical reality, nor do they offer an explanation of the universe. They merely describe, better than did the old model, the behavior of the observable objects in different situations. For a poet, this scientific evolution has a positive as well as a negative side. The negative aspect is the totally abstract character of the modern concept of the world, for the desire of the poet is always to reveal and to create a picture, convey a vision. The positive aspect is the opportunity now offered him to fashion scientific data according to his own fancy, a direct result of the physicist's inability to lay down any definite rules for a picture of the micro or the macrocosmos. Perhaps it would be more illuminating to compare these aspects with two parallel lines, which in the world of the new geometries may conceivably meet in a vision. The excellent popularizations of Eddington, Jeans, Gamow, Hoyle, and others are the chief sources from which Harry Martinson has taken his basic ideas of scientific evolution. We shall briefly touch on the use of, for instance, the indeterministic character of modern physics, the law of entropy, and the advances of astronomy in Aniara, but some explanation must first be given of the actual terminology employed in the poem. Martinson has created dozens of new worlds. This in itself is not original, as the same technical exoticism can be found in most books of science fiction, although on a smaller scale. A scientific motivation exists for even apparently meaningless combinations of letters. This is conditioned by the semantic difficulties which arise when we apply everyday words to the world of the atom. Relying on experience in macrocosmos, we have invented concepts such as particle, wave, velocity, position, time, etc., and transposed them without further ado to microcosmos. Yet we have no guarantee whatever that these concepts represent what really happens inside the atom. The majority of physicists will agree that in all probability they do not. Eddington, who has inspired much of the terminology in Aniara, says in his book The Nature of the Physical World, 1928, with regard to the movements of the electron round the nucleus, quote, "Something unknown is doing we don't know what. That is what our theory amounts to." End quote. It did not amount to more in 1928, nor does it today. Immediately after this, from the epistemological viewpoint, highly unsatisfactory statement, Eddington quotes from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking-Glass, quote, "'Twas brillig and the slithy tobs did gyre and gimble in the wabe." End quote. The object of these lines, in themselves quite meaningless, is to give the reader mental associations in the direction intended by the author. Eddington goes on to show that Carroll's verses may be as efficient as, or even more efficient than, prose in describing an atomic process, on the condition that one attaches numbers to the words. According to this line of thought, the new words in Aniara are symbols which conjure up pictures of objects and happenings beyond the range of the reader's imagination. All words are, in a sense, symbols. But whereas the word monkey, for instance, evokes a familiar image for most people, expressions such as phototurb, protator, gopta, or atom give, in their context, at most a vision. Here lies a poetic playground in which Harry Martinson loves to romp. The new words do not have to have any given significance, and the reader is free to test his own imagination with varying interpretations. For symbols, unless they are purely logical, can obviously be read in many ways, and among the different variants there may well be those of which the author himself was not at first aware. A few interpretations, mainly as given by Martinson himself, appear in the glossary. Mima, the ingenious transmitter on board, is the main source of comfort to Aniara's passengers and their sole remaining contact with the Earth. From a technical viewpoint, her prototype is a mathematical computer or electronic brain. In finding names for her component parts, the author gives his fancy full scope. Quote, "The cantor works have octopus feelers." End quote. The ninth protator signals movement, and so on. Mima is equipped with miraculous powers. She can intercept and reproduce events from other worlds in distant galaxies, and her pictures are capable, like dreams, of dissipating both the passengers' memories of Doris Earth, which, in spite of all, they long for, and their realization of the hopeless plight in the present. Gradually, the inmates of Aniara become a sect of Mima worshippers who kneel beside the goddess's pedestal each time pure terror threatens to annihilate them. Mima herself is incorruptible and faithfully reproduces all that comes her way. But, quote, perpetually through space sweep evil rumors. Good rumors always leave less trace. End quote. And for this reason, the poet, the faithful Mima's blue liturgist, occasionally tinkers with the transmission. He bottles every memory that's suitable, administering now and then, as a cure for angst, a dose of Mima's dream preserves. One sees, on closer examination, that Mima only superficially resembles a modern mathematical computer. A large number of her activities lie beyond human analysis and have been invented by Mima herself, whose powers are, quote, 3,080 times greater than anything a human being could achieve if he or she could take the Mima's place. End quote. When the atomic bomb smashes Dorisberg, Mima collapses under the strain of the ghoulish news she has to break. Quote, she suffered with the very stones, for she had seen the hot white tears of granite when stones and ore are vaporized. It wrung her heart to hear these stones lament. The simplest interpretation of Mima is that of a universal conscience, or soul, with whom the poet communicates. The pantheistic structure of Martinson's cosmos is most clearly indicated in Song 13, in which the chief astronomer describes Aniara's journey through the curved space of the universe by comparing it with a crystal bubble moving imperceptibly round the circumference of a glass bowl. Another theme in Aniara is the indeterministic character of present-day science. In the ambiguous 47th song, quote, a philosopher of point sets, nay, a mystic of the school of transfinite numbers, end quote, tiptoes quietly into Isagel, the Isis Urania of modern mathematics and astronomy, with a question about, quote, the frequency of wonders in cosmos gauged by point-set mathematics, end quote. Robert, the robot, who is a decent chap, receives his instructions from Isagel and begins energetically shifting and sorting out the point-set load on the Gupta wagon. But Robert's efforts bring no solution. It appears, unfortunately, that the frequency of wonders corresponds to the frequency of chance. Quote, that chance and miracle have a common source, and consequently the same answer would seem valid for both. End quote. This theme recurs in the 55th song, when an astronomer on the star deck holds a popular lecture for listeners who are, for the most part, lethargic or scornful. The astronomer, modest in his knowledge, quote, describes to us how the universe plays dice in distant solar systems with the scalding novas. End quote. A contrary opinion to this was expressed, for instance, by Einstein during a famous discussion at a physicists' congress in Brussels in 1927, when he ironically asked Bohr and others whether they really believed that God plays dice. Einstein was, towards the end of his life, almost the only defender of this deterministic viewpoint. Aniara's author does not accept his attitude, but he does accept another philosophy which is often linked with determinism, namely pantheism. Indeterminism, on the other hand, fuses with pantheism in the 88th song, when Isagel, the ruler of pure thought, our spirit's succor, who was also the Mima's very self, the Mima's soul, is summoned by a messenger from the mansions of eternity. Quote, invisible to us, she glided quietly into the region of the laws of numbers where endless, unexplored reserves await us when the powers of chance decide the hour has come. End quote. According to the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy, the evolution of cosmos moves unhesitatingly from order towards chaos. Suns issue from the wombs of dark nebulae, speed proudly on their blazing courses, and disappear again into the darkness from which they came. The 77th song is a mournful variation on this desolate theme, which also appears, for instance, in the last line of the epic and in the Song of Disintegration, 83. Quote, "Hear the rusty trombones, hear how the zitras are playing of the Sphinx, marred and ravaged by lepra above desert sands, to comfort the races which have seen all their customs disintegrate like boulders obscenely devoured by the merciless ages." End quote. Thus, Harry Martinson applies the second law of thermodynamics not only to dead objects, but to man himself. Also in our souls, he says, the entropy of evil is continuously expanding, and the dark instincts of destruction point the way to death and chaos. Who knows whether they have not already become so strong that neither good deeds, tenderness, nor love, in the long run, can continue to oppose them. That deadly minus sign, the spear of emptiness, has pierced us all. Before man, the king of ashes, God and Satan flee, hand in hand. In Song 62, the author speaks of, quote, "the long battle light wages against the darkness without end." End quote. The combination light-darkness forms a leitmotif which gives associations to the sinister law of entropy and also to Gnosticism and Manichaeism. Yet throughout Aniara, as a consequence of modern science, like an arrow pointing to the future, runs an awareness of the inherent danger of lucidity, of all light. We have, as it were, become conscious not only of the visible light which was once a divine element, but also of an invisible dark illumination, the light of Röntgen and gamma rays, which, though admittedly a healer, is also a deadly threat to our existence. Earlier, the words lucidity and light were associated with such concepts as harmony and Olympic peace. We imagine Goethe, for instance, as a representative of this sublimity. Today, science has placed man in quite another position. Consciously or unconsciously, we associate lucid realization of our plight with the word angst. The association is understandable, for although science continues to advance, the ethical progress of man, gauged by the behavior of the different countries towards each other, has lagged behind, seeming to remain roughly where it was during the Stone Age. We are now facing the consequences of this unequal race in the fear that man will not be able to control the destructive weapons produced by science. Aniara is the tragedy of a generation which cannot solve this problem. Harry Martinson is a pioneer of the poetry of the atomic age. No poet before him has tackled the formidable task of studying man with the aid of modern science, of penetrating his soul with gamma rays, of testing his mind with electronic brains, or observing him in the astronomical perspective of the 200-inch reflector at Mount Palomar. In Aniara, poetry and science have become organically fused, and it is to the fact that the images culled from science fit so neatly into its general pattern and purpose that the poem owes its overwhelming impact. What the reader witnesses, at a distance too short to be entirely comfortable, is a poetic nuclear explosion. The songs follow each other in blast waves. In their wake, he senses the hurricane droughts, the seething heat, and the gradual aftermath of radiation in a work whose symphonic breadth derives from one shuddering theme: man's journey through his own emptiness, humanity's fall away from Earth into the trackless void. Aniara. My first remembered meeting with my Doris shines with a light stronger than light itself, and yet with a simplicity in meeting that all may have in any transit hall where the forced emigrants are herded off to their fell gangways for the planet Mars and to the tundras. Earth must have a rest for all her poisons, launch her refugees out into space, and keep her quarantine. She writes out the embarkation cards, her 5 small fingernails gleaming like dim lamps in the hall's half-light, and says, "Please sign your name just here where the light of my blondness falls on this card, which you must keep. In case any trouble should occur to jolt both space and time, you must come back and write your impressions of it here in this space. Look, set apart for that. Now you must state precisely what particular part of Mars you want to reach. As the form states, you may each take a pot of non-infected soil with you, and I'll seal up also at least 3 cubic feet of earth for every passenger on board." She looks at me with the disdain beauty so easily assumes on seeing whichever way she looks the clumsy movements of the folk thronging the stairs to the starting points, and watches the ever-increasing crowds huddling like sheep through the exit there, bound helplessly for other worlds. The sheer absurdity of living stands out so appallingly then for us, who've tried year after year to find some chink through which a ray of hope might reach this hideous hall, where now these flocks of numbered emigrants start up whenever the siren blows. Goldonda Aniara's closed. The usual signal goes to quit our gravitational field, and now her gyro spinner starts to tow her up towards the zenith's light, where powerful magnetrines annul Earth's pull. Soon 0 signals given. The spaceship's free and weightless floats upwards like a bubble or a cork, vibrationless and undisturbed away from Earth, a normal start. A simple, gyromatic job with no sense of adventure now. Who could foresee that just this fight, all in the day's work as it seemed, was singled out to be unique and doomed to bear us all away from Earth and Sun, Venus and Mars, and life's entire environment? A swerve to avoid the asteroid Hondo, claimed as discovered thus, jerked us off route. So we missed Mars, bypassed its orbit, and avoiding the field of Jupiter, set course on the field Ice 12 in Magdalena's outer ring. But meeting then with a dim swarm of Leonides, fell back even more to Yoko 9, till in the field of SAR 16 we needs gave up our effort to turn round, since we, just on the point of turning, saw a ring of boulders which gave us the echographic picture of a torus, whose empty center now we wildly sought, and finally found, but only at so steep a tilt the intersection brought disaster to our Saba aggregate, peppered by a great hail of Leonides and meteors. So when the ring of boulders left focus and space was clear again, we'd passed the point of no return, our course pointing to Lyra now, and no change of direction could be thought of. We lay in dead space. Luckily, our machinery still worked all right, our central heating and lighting both unharmed, although some of the instruments had been destroyed, while others were repairable, perhaps. Our unhappy fate was certain now. Our only hope, the Ariana, would keep going to whatever end. Thus it was, when the solar system closed its gateway of purest crystal and cut off the spaceship Aniara from all the associations and promises of the sun. So at the mercy of impassive space we sent our hailing signal Aniara through crystal-clear infinity, but we could make no contact now. Though space's vibrations obediently spread Aniara's last call in ever-widening rings, since these and Aniara were concentric, the call simply vanished in the void. Sent in anguish by us in Aniara, our hailing signal just echoed and re-echoed Aniara, Aniara. The pilots are more resigned than we, being fatalists of the new sort space creates through the hypnotic power of seemingly unchanging stars on man's passion for riddles, since death, accepted as inevitable, fits naturally into their scheme of things. But even so, now, in the 6th year of our flight, one can see how even they look down as from a precipice of fear. In their unguarded moments sometimes, able to read their expression, I can see despair shines like the glow of phosphor in their still ceaselessly questing eyes. This shows most clearly in the case of the woman pilot. She often sits gazing at the Mima, and then a change comes in her lovely eyes. They become mysterious, the irises full of melancholy fire, a hungry fire seeking fuel to preserve the light of her soul. She told me once, about a year ago, she herself was ready to resign, accept her fate and prepare for death. She suggested we should have a farewell feast and then just disappear. Many agreed, but the passengers and all the naive emigrants who, even now, hardly realize their hopeless plight are the unrelinquishable trust of the leaders in their forward cabin whose duty is eternally inescapable now. We see through the Mima life exists in many different places, though where the Mima cannot show. Pictures appear, fragments of landscapes, and we catch snatches of language spoken somewhere. But where? Our Mima does her best and searches constantly. Her electronic equipment registers. Her lenses give their basic report to her selective cells, and they assemble and project what they can, pictures, sounds, and scents in a rich stream, but cannot show where these come from. That is always beyond the scope of the powers given to a Mima. To use a metaphor, she gets her fish in other seas than those we are sailing through now, and makes her space catches in the forests and valleys of undiscoverable worlds. I, the Mima robe, look after the Mima, calm the emigrants, and liven them up with pictures from far distance of many things no human eye is formed to see. The Mima never lies. Her selective transmitting power, they know, is incorruptible and cannot lie, and is 3,080 times greater than anything a human being could achieve if he or she could take the Mima's place. Yet every time I start the Mima, they prostrate themselves as before an altar, and I have often heard them whisper, "Imagine, if only one were like the Mima." It's well the Mima has no feelings and no vanity built into her, but simply goes on as usual, transmitting pictures, sounds, and scents caught up from undiscovered lands, and does this quite impervious to flattery or worship. Unaffectedly aloof, she does not notice how, in this dark room, the compartment in which the Mima's housed, members of a special cult gather to caress her, stroke her pedestal, beg from her, the noble Mima, a word of comfort or advice about their journey, now in its 6th year. Then suddenly I see all's changed. The emigrants have begun at last to understand that what's been has been. Their earlier lives irrevocably gone, the only world open to us now, this world we journey in with Mima, that has no landfall and no goal save death by vanishment in endless space. We journey on towards certain death. Even so, the Mima still comforts all these souls, preparing them in peace and resignation for the last hour which comes to every human being, no matter where he or she may find temporary refuge. We still cling to the habits of our time on earth, the customs we followed in the land of Doris. We divide our time in day and night, pretend to see daybreak, twilight, sunset, though space surrounds us with everlasting night, so bitterly cold that those who still live in Doris have never felt its like. Our hearts are synchronous with the clock that follows sunrise, moonrise, and the set of both as seen from Doris's plains. Now it is summer night, midsummer night, and the people keep vigil hour by hour. But in the assembly hall, all but those who keep watch in infinity are dancing, dancing till the sun goes up on Doris. Then suddenly they know the sun did not go up, that life, already a dream in Doris, is even more a mere dream here, and now the dance hall is filled with sobs and vain hopes no one any longer tries to conceal. Dancing and music cease. The hall is deserted. All throng to our Mima, and for a short time our Mima can ease the pressure of despair, dispel the memories of life on Doris, for the world Mima shows glimpses of can often take the place of the world we remember, but have left forever. If this were not so, the Mima could never hold us and be worshipped as a holy being, nor would the women approach to stroke her pedestal in bliss and trembling. Our souls are wasted by dreams, the ceaseless chafing for lack of reality of dream against dream, and each new dream's a ladder to the next dream-filled air pocket. Everywhere far distant is our home. Our support lies beyond all boundaries. I pour out my need to Doris's valleys, and our perpetual longing to be there is health itself, the art of living here. We seldom think now of our immense proud wonder of a spaceship. Only during funeral speeches do we suddenly realize that this is actually our world. Then many a somber thought swoops below the vaulting of these indifferent rooms which, filled with the echoes of their own life, glide on forever through unfathomable space. We hurry to the Mima to receive the comfort she can let us see but never reach. So thousands flock in never-ending streams through every opening to where Mima's housed. Perhaps in a flash we may remember then the ship's length is 16,000 feet, her breadth 3,000, and the number of passengers aboard her 8,000. That everything was built for emigration on a vast scale, and that this ship is only one of many thousands, all of the same construction and size, which ply regularly to Mars and Venus, that we alone have been flung off course until one day the chief star-master told us we were in the inner astronomical field no longer, but everything possible would be done to make life in the outer astronomical field a voyage of discovery and a step, the longest so far, towards the next astronomical field. When later it became clear to the leaders that there was no means of return to inner space and that the laws of outer space were of another kind to those which clearly govern the routine of inner space, there was panic at first. Then apathy, which, between bouts of desperation, spread its frozen insensitivity, its cold, doldrum world of lifelessness, until the Mima, like a friend in need, to everyone's relief, threw open her treasury of visions. Certain features have developed in the Mima of a kind hitherto unknown to human thought, such as, for example, the third Vebens function in the focusing apparatus and the ninth Protator's signal of movement in the phase of unfocused vibration before the selective cells take charge of everything and distribute and assemble it. The inventor himself was shattered completely the day he found half the Mima he'd made lay beyond analysis and had been invented, in fact, by the Mima herself. Oh, well, as we all know, he changed his title. He was modest enough to admit, once the Mima had taken form, she was superior, and he himself a mere machine-minder, a mimator. He died, but Mima still lives on. He died, but she developed her own style and carried on in the knowledge of herself and of her possibilities and limitations. A telegrator with no conceit, industrious, capable, a patient searcher, unbribable, clear-sighted, a filter of truth, beyond reproach. Who can be surprised, then, if I, the mechanic, Mima's guardian in Aniara, am moved when I see how men and women fall on their knees in holy faith before her. I pray myself when they pray to Mima that what is happening is true, and that this consolation Mima gives is a glimpse of the light of true consolation seeking us in this lonely house of space. The empty, sterile universe is terrifying. Its stare, concentrated on us, glassy, the immitigable glare of nothingness. Seen through Aniara's rounded crystal windows, the stellar system seems rigid, immobile. So it becomes vital for us to preserve our dream pictures of Doris's valleys, and here in the motionless ocean of space, jealously preserve every memory, every pulse of feeling. The faintest sigh seems like a balmy wind. All tears are fountains, and the ship herself a hind leaping forward in silence towards the constellation of the Lyra, whose stars do not seem to move a fraction of an inch, either to right or left, and whose distance away is so immense in time and space our minds cannot conceive it. It seems that everything's congealed, fast frozen in mountains of infinity, like specks of diamond dust inside a crystal enfolding eternity in massive halls of endlessness. And all our words, worn out by use and employed to describe mountains, expanses of water, and landscapes to which they were never adequate, have been exhausted by a race which could not foresee a time would come when these words, so carelessly squandered, would be needed just where they really apply, on this spaceship bound for the Lyra. What then is left to us, who need every word we can find to express these boundless reaches of the autumn of space? To comfort ourselves, we must seek for other words, for words instead which can reduce and minimize. So the word star becomes obscene, and the slang terms for a woman's paps or vagina respectable. Indecent, too, the brain which caused our deportation into space. A spokesman for the leaders now stands up before the people in the great halls of the ship's stern. He tells them not to despair, but to understand their fate in the clear light of scientific knowledge. He says that this is not the first time the like has happened. 60 years ago, a big Goldonda, having on board no fewer than 14,000 souls, was lost. Going towards Orion's belt, her instruments disintegrated. She dived at wildly increasing speed towards Jupiter, and was engulfed in its deserts and buried under the giant star's heavy casing and deadly mattresses of frozen hydrogen which, to a depth of about 1,000 miles, armor that evil star with ice-cold gas. Things could have been just as bad here, but we are luckier, he says, not having crashed onto any star. Our journey lies ahead of us, a lifelong journey to an end from which there is no possible escape. The jazz bands goad us in a crazy dance. The girl I partner uses every chance. She hails from Dorisburg and says quite frankly that though she's danced up here for several years in Aniara, there's no difference in this Jurg from what we used to dance in Dorisburg. So long as we are dancing, we are clear that everything is wonderful up here. There's Daisy Duty swaying from the hips with all the slang of Doris on her lips. Glorious nonsense, just as in the Jurg we danced, or thought we did, in Dorisburg. You gamma down, dear, and go jail and dory. You've never seen me dazzled like a lorry. No Chadwick bothers me, you know, pouts Daisy. I piv in pisty lollop on my lazy, never quarrel with my morals as I fondle with my rondels and waved in tarry gimble with my gondols. I feel bewildered as we sway and swing. The grief I nourish threatens to take wing, as with this human child I dance the Jurg and baffle space with slang from Dorisburg. In the 6th year, Aniara flew on with unbroken speed towards the Lyra. The chief astronomer addressed the emigrants on the scope of space. He held a delicate glass bowl. Slowly we realize the space we travel in is a different kind to what we always pictured in our minds when the word space caught our imagination on Earth. It dawns upon us now the extent to which we are cut off must be far greater than we first feared. That knowledge was a blue naivety, which, from a measured dose of thought, inferred the mystery had form. We gather now what we call space, this glassy void round Aniara's hull, is spirit, everlasting and elusive, and we are lost in oceans of the spirit. Our spaceship Aniara is borne on in something that has no container and needs no directing brain stuff. She is borne on in something which exists but need not follow in the ways of thought. Through God and death and mystery she goes, our spaceship without trace or goal. Oh, could we but turn back to our base now we have fathomed what our spaceship is, a tiny bubble in a glass of God. Listen to what I know about glass, and you'll see. In every glass which stands for long enough untouched, a tiny flaw or bubble may appear that moves with infinite slowness to a point within the glass, and in 1,000 years the bubble's made a journey in its glass. So, too, in boundless space, a gulf of light years forms the arcades which enclose the bubble Aniara. Although she travels at tremendous speed, swifter than a planet in its course, by the standards of the universe, her speed is no whit greater than that the bubble achieves in its glass. Appalled by this perception, I stumble, shivering from Mima's hall, back to the lights of the dance hall to find Daisy there. I plead for the shelter of her arms again. I beg for entry to a hair-clothed vagina where the cold certainty of death may be forgotten. What remains of life in Mima's hall at least is there in Daisy's warmth. Doris still lives here when in each other, free from cold and danger, we forget the vacancy round Aniara. A group called ticklers has been formed. They meet to tickle and be tickled. Most are women, though the leaders are men and are called the kindlers, an ancient word from pre-Goldondic days. The word appears in the Blue Archive. It is connected in some way with food in an ancient sense and with flames. More I do not know. As a child at school I remember seeing a naked flame on one occasion. It was lit from a piece of wood which was shown round. It spread smoke and even a little heat. Then when everyone had seen it, the twig was dipped in water and the pretty flame put out. Wood was rare then. It was plentiful in pre-Goldondic days, but since owing to the radiation disaster, scarce. We were quite excited, I recall, as we stood there in a ring and saw the tiny twiglet fame. But that was long ago. Alas, so very long ago. I turn off the Mima, go my rounds, and listen to the emigrants and to the crew, and hear an old space sailor's tale of Nobby, obviously his love story. She was hardly good-looking, my little Nobby, pale and scarred by radiation burns. Tainted 3 times, she very nearly fluttered away, but was hauled back each time, thanks to Gamosan and Tiba rays. And after a few years in the bleak wards of the hospital barracks on Tundra 2, caught a cheap Goldonda back from Mars to Earth, and there began her refugee help, her endless money-box collections for the needy on Mars and Venus. Mars folk need protecting from the cold, Venus folk from their swampy climate. Did she wear herself out? You bet she did. To go on, I fell very much in love with little Nobby and cannot forget the poor snatched chances we ever got for love's dream on Tundra 2, the few times I was there. A mere volunteer in the 15th Goldonda then, named Max, built for the Venus trip but later rebuilt for refugee and rescue runs to Tundra 2. The 32nd War had just ended. Control Plan 3 was carried through. You all know how things were. a new Dick at the helm, tortures in the cells for those who hadn't voted for him. The rest, already sufficiently subdued, their rucksacks donned, were hustled off on convict Goldanda 7 for 3 years turf digging on Tundra 9, one of the worst tundras to be found on the whole slum planet. We were there once, but enough of administrative pretense. The way the card index was juggled with was worst. The hard and heartless and the kindly ones were changed in the card index many times. At regular intervals, human goodness was shuffled to a card index for evil. And in this ghoulish jungle of controls, one must admire the Mima who can restore to proper order such a contrived chaos, for everyone played at least 4 parts in the hide-and-seek of these spectral politics. Through swing doors, which continually revolve, as swing doors do when a stream of folk goes through, a few voices are heard above the general din. All sound of despair or faith or courage merges in and is lost. And one hears scattered voices singing songs whose nature shows they are still sung, with some mystic hope seeking immunity in the vacancy of space or through the Mima's visions. Soon they'll be here, my happy cast-iron days, when I can stand proof against the fire and cold which threatens to destroy my peace of mind. Soon they'll be here, my happy cast-iron days. But the murmur grows, and all flock to the Mima, shouting as though in grievous lamentation, till Mima's comfort comes from hidden worlds in pictures drawn from an inconceivable source. The shores of bliss reflected by the Mima shone for us hour by hour in all their glory, but now the world of bliss has passed away. Slung out towards a new infinity, this saga was submerged in darker shadows by waves which even Mima cannot stay, and we are left to shiver, weak, alone. The profound plunges you may seem to make into imagined depths on which you can stake some hope are all entirely without value here, for there are no depths here to reach. Here we can follow every dive you take and measure just how far, how deep it goes. Such dives make no impression on the crystal where we can see any such maneuver is a turn back to the point from which you dived. Such feats do not convince us any more. The man who is space-conscious seldom dives, but should he ever essay to explore the void, he very soon comes back and divests himself of such equipment as science seems to offer for even the briefest dip into this sea. His thought is merely to obtain a view of this illimitable vacancy's sole cloud, the long stiff cloud of white metal which, luminous with reflected light, lies still, or seems to lie, although, in truth, she moves at a speed which would stand on end the hair of those who do not realize how fast we go towards the Lyra in our spaceship Aniara. I was sent out once to make a check of the Mima's cell works, and from this direction 7,000 to 8,000 meters radially, Aniara looked majestic as she lay. From space's sea I saw with deep emotion our poor old Dow, so far from Doris's land as she drew patiently on towards the Lyra from space's Zanzibar, with the slave burden of our time. This kind of ivory is heaviest of all, where branded with the hard name of association from an unreachable and hostile world, it grimly hampers Aniara's voyage. Attempts at respite through the flight of thought and constant transference from dream to dream was often our method of seeking relief, with one leg steeped in a food of feeling and one supported by a lack of feeling. We often stood. I questioned myself, but quite forgot to answer. I dreamed of life, but quite forgot to live. I ranged the universe, but could not travel farther, for I was imprisoned here, in Aniara. The woman navigator enters the Mima room and gives a silent sign that I should switch on the Mima. How sovereign she is, and how aloof. She wounds, but as a rose may wound, not always as expected with its thorn. A rose will always wound you with its rose, although the sore may seem a thorny scar. Perhaps more often it will be a mark of sheerest beauty, beauty's fire alone. How gracious Doris, now in this 6th year, changed more and more into a distant star, a sun which like a spark burns in my eye, and with its immeasurable golden needle pierces my heart through all the reaches of the intense inane. She blazed more broadly once when she was nearer, but stings more sharply now she is so far away. I start the Mima, sit a while, and wait to see how gradually the expression brightens in curious transformation on the face of this lovely woman pilot who with such aloofness surrounds each changing aspect of her beauty. But Mima works, and Mima explains all. The pale cheeks of the fair one flush and redden. She is filled with heavenly intoxication when Mima shows her all that still exists, unreachable in boundless space. She smiles, she laughs, ecstatically, helplessly, as though she were suddenly seized by God. But just as she seems near the acme of bliss, the third Veben switches Mima's focus, and other worlds crowd in upon the Mima. The lovely woman's color changes swiftly. I close the Mima. She is meant to comfort and not to tantalize her human watchers with glimpses of worlds like that they've left. Problems and experiences which absorbed us all in the far-off days while we were still in Doris are not what should be shown this woman now. I caress her then by switching off the Mima, because the Mima's truth is incorruptible, showing the sheer truth of all created things. The woman rises, nods me her silent thanks for shutting off the Mima. She turns round in the door, tells me to call her back sometime, when Mima intercepts. Intercepts what? She does not say, but I can guess. Friendly, familiar Doris, kind Doris, far distant Doris, now a noble planet on which we long to stand. Now she's a pinpoint star. Oh, if I only knew from where she glimmers now in this 6th year of our fugue so wholly merged with suns of space that I can never find that star again, the noble planet Doris. All one has dreamt so long of intercepting, remote, unseizable visions of old agonies and happinesses so long exhausted come to us on spent waves through the Mima. On far forgotten waves the pictures turned and cast in a mysterious echograph, in labyrinthine curves through the void, and all the rumors of space reach us here. Perpetually through space sweep evil rumors. Good rumors always leave less trace, for goodness does not belong to the life of action. Its light is the same light this year and every year. But doubt is an acid which corrodes more dreams than any dreamer can conjure up, and only through the Mima can we see and relive the warmth and beauty of our dreams. I treasure, therefore, every memory I can that has consolation's glow and recalls life, and each time terror tiptoes through the ship and fear and despair tear at our nerves, I serve a few of Mima's dream preserves. The doctor who keeps watch over our eyes and sees the zest for life grow dim in them is perplexed by lacus lachrymalis, where crocodiles are no more to be seen. A flood of tears like this in Mima's halls pays tribute to the distant scenes of Doris. And yet it almost seems as though these tears, despite their obvious sincerity, are cold. Like crystal water risen from great depth, they fall with a too pure transparency, like virgin rain which never touches earth. Our disillusioned weeping in Aniara of our thoughts. We found support from the chief astrolabe. He knew all about the light of distant stars, but suddenly the star of reason was extinguished in the chief star master's own brain. Pressed to his death by our expectancy, his mind gave way and died of spiritual need. Frustration storms on in its own way, blasphemes and curses space and time. But many think already that we suffer just punishment as we fly on to the Lyra, for we ourselves, by the hard laws of space, have shut ourselves in the sarcophagus where we must conduct our living burial till all our vanity lays down its scepter. After a millennium or a myriad years, some distant sun will capture a gray moth which flies towards it as though to the lamp of autumn long ago in Doris's valleys. Then our space journey will come to an end. We'll all sleep heavily in Aniara, and things will quickly change in Mima's hall. The sarcophagus bears us quietly on. We cannot harm the planet as before, nor even spread again the peace of death. Here we can question freely and answer truthfully while our lost spaceship, Aniara, flies on through lonely space, time left behind. The stone-deaf mute began thus to describe the worst sound he had heard. "You could not hear it. Yes, just before my eardrums burst apart, the last sound came, a sigh of surging reeds, when the phototurb burned and blasted Dorisberg. You could not hear it," whispered the deaf mute. "My ear was not in time to hear, when souls were torn apart and bodies hurled away, at 6 square miles of townland twisted, themselves inside out, as the phototurb destroyed the mighty town which once was Dorisberg." Even thus he spoke, the deaf mute who was dead, and since it said that stones cry out in anguish, this was the dead man calling through a stone. He shouted through the stone, "Can you hear me?" He shouted through the stone, "Can't you hear me?" "I come from that great city, Dorisberg," and then the blind man started to describe the appalling fiery glare that burned out his eyes. Describe it he could not. He mentioned but one detail. He saw with his neck. His whole scalp, flayed open, was an eyeball which, dazzled beyond the bounds of bursting, was lifted, whirled away in blinded trust in the sleep of death. But that was not a sleep. Even so his words arc like the deaf mute's, and since it said that stones cry out in anguish, so he cries out through stones with the deaf mute. They cry out through stones to each other. They cry out from the stone pits with Cassandra. I dash towards the Mima as though I might arrest the frightful action with my anguish, but Mima shows it all, uncompromising, transmits to the last picture fire and slaughter, and turning to the passengers I scream my agony of pain at Doris's destruction. There is protection against almost anything, against fire and damage caused by storm and cold. Yes, count up everything you can think of, but there is no protection against man. When it is really necessary, no one sees clearly anyhow. No, only when the point was to destroy, to obliterate all that the heart had saved of dreams to live on through cold, evil years. Mima's put out of action by a sheer blue blaze, and I'm struck dumb by what's befallen the wretched earth. The blaze shoots here into my heart as into an open sore, and I, our faithful Mima's blue liturgist, with frozen blood, the hideous tidings here, Doris has perished in distant Dorisberg. I seek a last comfort of Daisy now, for she's the only woman left who can speak our lovely Dorisberg dialect, while I am the last man who understands what Daisy, alluringly, with nimble tongue, still prattles in the happy idiom of our lost city. Come, rock a sway and shimble. coaxes Daisy. Droom dazily, come hillow in my billows. I don't quarrel with my morals as I fondle with my rondels, and wathed in tarry gimble with my gondols. And I who know how Dorisberg has been devastated forever by the phototurb am content that Daisy's just the way she is. What would be the sense of breaking the enchantment Daisy, unsuspectingly, has kept so well that she, lying carelessly at her ease, or swaying in sensual bliss after the dance, has no idea that since some hours ago she is the widow of great Dorisberg? She asks me to sing to her, and I start the cast-iron ballad I used to know about the town of Gond, destroyed by war. But Daisy prattles, unsuspecting, gay. Her whole being is so manifestly meant only to sing the praise of dancing and dance the Jurg. What were I but a monster if I shattered the living magic she conjures up from her own breast, her joyfully sensual heart? She prattles as in fever till she falls asleep. Around our place of vigil Aniara is still, though not in sleep. Clear thought is still awake, mindful of the far earth now lost forever, and only Daisy's heart beats free of danger, while nightmare clearness reigns in Aniara. For several days after Doris's destruction, the Mima showed disturbance from the phototurb, and the third Weben fought as against a cloud of deepening distant shame. On the third day the Mima prayed deliverance from the sight. On the fourth day she gave me some instructions about the octopus feelers of the Cantor works. Not till the fifth day was she calm again, receiving a broadcast from a better world, and once more her cell works glowed serenely. But on the seventh day there came a surging from Mima's cell works I'd never heard before. The indifferent third Weben's Tassis switched off, then reported itself blind, and suddenly the Mima called me forward to the inner barrier, and with apprehension I went towards her, towards the awful goddess. And as I stood there, shaking and cold with fear, and full of anxiety for her condition, the Mima's phonoglobe began to speak suddenly to me in the dialect she and I used most for everyday purposes. She bade me tell the leaders here that she, for some time past, had felt as guilty as the very stones, for she had heard them crying out, as stones will do, on distant Doris's plains, and she had seen the hot white tears of granite. When stones and ores are vaporized, it wrung her heart to hear these stones lament. Her cell works dimmed and damaged by the cruelty which, in his evil, only man can show, she came, as might be expected, to the point where she at last, as even Mima's must, broke down. The indifferent third Weben's Tassis sees 1,000 things no human eye can see. Now, in the name of these, the Mima craved for surcease. She will not speak again. But it was all too late. I could not keep the crowd from rushing into Mima's hall. I shouted, yelled to them to turn back, but none of them obeyed me, for though all would gladly have fled in terror, yet they were irresistibly drawn to see the worst. A flash of blue fire leaped from Mima's screen. A rumbling echoed through Mima's hall, like thunder long ago in Doris's valleys. A wave of horror broke upon the crowd, and many emigrants were crushed and trampled when Mima died in space's Aniara. The final words she uttered were a message sent by the victim of disintegration. She let this witness testify for himself, and stammering, incoherent, tell how ghastly fission is in mind and body, how time comes surging in and surges on, how time comes surging at the wail of life, prolonging the grim second of one's dissolution, how terror whirls about, how horror blows away, how ghastly fission is in mind and body. A time of bitterest misery ensued, And long I sat, in silence, brooding in Mima's hall, to which the evil sent the storm of its dark rays from uttermost space. Despairingly I struggled to repair our hallowed Mima's mechanism of skill and comfort, and with the tensor calculus strove to revive the miracle's center in her breast. But the voice of her phonoglobe was silent now, and her sensostat only received messages from some Boeotian spirit of such dullness that it lay far below both man and God. And now, too, I was pestered by the mob, who crowded in, flinging jeers and curses upon me, crushed already in the pit by all that reached my heart from distant spheres. Even Chiffon, the Goldonda's ruthless master, came into me and mocked me every day, and though his malignant triumph was quite clear, threatened me with the penalties of the law. He often tried to make a mystery of his own role in our Goldonda's world, and devilishly to force all souls to believe that we were bound for Hades. He succeeded in this, and backed by the grim ghoulishness of space gave the impression of a man who drives his people with delight to defeat and extinction. Chiffon now instigated persecution, and I and many others had to find a hiding place deep down in the Goldonda till the vials of his wrath ran out. Down there dwelt experts in every branch connected with the tensor of the fourth degree, the while those who continually corrupt pure thought bathed in vainglory. Confused and unconvincingly, they tried to prove that Mima's tragic fate was all our fault. Her flow of pictures had been disturbed by each ego thinking its own thoughts, defiling her screen, thus dimming her comforting glow and obscuring the space waves, Mima's radiation. Protesting our innocence, we did our best to explain and instruct, using technical terms, yet in the language of the common man, strove to achieve a measure of lucidity. But this new language, meant to explain all, became nonsense to ourselves, a blind man's buff of words avoiding words, putting obscurity into the lucidity which is the soul of space. So next we tried to draw, as if for savages and prehistoric races of the kind one reads of as belonging to the eons of past existence and a primitive stage. We made these hieroglyphics look like trees and plants. We sketched the ramifications of a river, hoping by these means to devise a text which people needing such visual aids might understand. But when we ourselves heard only alien sounds in a tongue stripped of all formulas, we scarcely understood the very lessons with which we'd tried to give a helping hand. And finally, this court of arbitration, which was to absolve us from space's doom, became differentiated in absurdum, and the bridge between us as empty as before. With a system for the analytic testing of Mima's whole cycle of formulas, phase by phase, I became in due course such an expert at watching everything everywhere as through glass that in the third year following the day of Mima's demise in Aniara's halls, I managed to hit on the trans-Thomist principles which govern human rise or fall. On this discovery I went almost mad. The wild intoxication of deep, unreal joy transformed my soul into an all-seeing eye, taking in the whole house of space at once. I was brought up from my prison in Aniara's hold, where the woman pilot also was confined, back to the hall of our once hallowed Mima, and rumors spread. I heard the jubilant laughter. They all spoke of this great discovery and of Mima's comeback in the starry night. But beyond every solution lurks a mystery. I exulted all too soon in Mima's hall. I saw the key, indeed, but as through reaches of clear glass and fathomless mountain crystal. Without the aid of Mima, once my guide and helper, I faltered, weak and poor in spirit, the power of thought in consternation ebbed away. Deprived of Mima, I saw a mirrored world which glimmered and died out on Mima's screen. By Mima's ruin, as though fallen among fires, I saw her breast, a blackened, burnt-out shell. I have no name myself. Attached to Mima, I am known, therefore, as the Mima robe. The oath I took is called Goldan Divan. The name I used to bear was erased at the first testing and must forever be forgotten. With Isagel, the woman pilot, things have so fallen out that her position decides her name, which is a code word. Her true and secret name, the one she whispered close to my ear, I cannot here betray. Her eyes reflect the inaccessible yet gentle light of things unspoken, the light so often seen in mysterious things when beauty has surpassed the mystery, and as she draws the graphs, her nail tips glimmer like opaque lamps in the half-light of the halls. She says, "Please follow the graphs here with your numbers where the dark shadow of my sorrow falls." And then she rises from her gupta table, and the radiance of her thoughts illuminates me. Our glances meet, and soul to soul, in silence, we stand. I worship Isagel. The inexorability of space drives us to practices and beliefs we have not had since pre-Goldandic days. Now, half forgotten, and Aniara's 4 religions with priests, crucifixes, and temple bells, the cult of the vagina, clamoring Jurgenor, the sect of ticklers, perpetually laughing, reappear in space, crowding on each other's heels to fill the vast deserts of eternity. And I, who, in my role of Mima robe, am held responsible for all illusions which have been broken, must make room in Mima's crypt and hold everything in line when the lustful, libidinous women and voluptuaries in the sex dance of the cult surround their god. I look at the women embellishing their beauty. For many of them this is not so hard. Here wanders Yaal, a dormified Jurgenor, whose power of love is now at its prime, and there stands Libidel from Venus's green, perpetually fertile jungle spring, and close beside Chebeba, Jurg-obsessed. And with a Candian jewel on her thigh stands Dormajun Gina. Round her surge the flock of novices whom she instructs. At one time I developed the idea of so placing 1,000 mirrors that they could give us everything that mirrors can of bright reflection and seemingly widened space which optically magnifies every inch to an illusory depth of some 8,000 inches, and when we had furnished 20 halls like this, with mirrors taken from another 80, the results were so magnificent that for 4 long years with mirror glass, I could entrance the soul distraught. To keep our minds off our fatal journey and turn them to the happy world of mirrors, I introduced so many to the bliss induced by mirrors in a house of mirrors. Even I myself found time for Jurg with daisy duty from far Dorisburg. And even with Chebeba and with Yaal, I and my reflections danced in Mima's hall. They come in relays. I see them livened by Jurg and Colt, and cannot but admire when, Jurg entranced, they circle between mirrors, reflected eightfold in a mirrored world. From all directions, swaying in the Jurg, they seem themselves a dancing heavenly host in all the glory of eightfold reflection. Chebeba 8 times over, 8 times Yaal, and Gina 8 times in an octagonal hall. See Libidel with skilled, unerring hand as she eggs on a man from Doris land. And now Chebeba, when in Jurgian bliss, she whirls across to mirrored nothingness, where 8 Chebebas, dancing in to meet, show her 8 times again her breasts and feet. For everything must shimmer like a mirage when mirrored dance is danced on mirrored limbs. Illusions point the way through Jurgian halls to mirrored valleys and to mirrored plains. Desire and piety go hand in hand. On rolls the chariot, drawn by a team of men and women, members of the cult. The chaste staff lifted by Isagel is held up with the lantern of the cult, when Libidel, her retinue, 8 libidinor, glides to the ceremony, lies down in readiness. Later, when all are warmed by vaginal fire and lie there drowsily and in content, Isagel, with her lowered staff, moves forward and touches, with the lantern, thrice, 3 times our holy shrine, our blessed Mima's grave. Then comes a sigh line, wind-swept reefs, when Yaal, peace in her bosom, absolved from desire, kneels lingering by the shrine, supplicating with tender whisperings the goddess's bier. What peace in her expression as she hears the dutiful singing of the Day of Days, and Isagel and Libidel and Gina circle the grave in chorus with Chibiba. In her dressing room behind Mima's hall, lovely Libidel sat one winter night, a watch upon her thigh, beside her a Buddha cat, a glistening jewel in the hollow of her navel. In her bosom flashed a heart-shaped pendant. Her breasts, warming the coldness of the stone, bore round her nipples a dark ring of charcoal, well calculated for the glow of Tirsos lamps. But watchful envy lay in ambush, waiting and purring quietly its panther song, ready to tear to shreds the legend of her beauty and scatter it in triumph to the winds. Her subtle lines still granted her the right to lead the cult, but the day was drawing near when Bikinilan would but enhance their failings and could no longer intrigue the devotees. But now she began to hide the promise which lay but a few inches from the sacred center, and a chinombric complement draped round her hips helped to distract the mind of the beholder. But many connoisseurs among the pious nourished in secrecy their growing doubts. No longer did they queue as formerly to enjoy her favors when she led the cult. Libidel, apprehensive, smooths her hair. Her jeweled navel now seems like a sore, but she hopes, all the same, her ample breasts in fellowship with graceful thighs will keep her for another year at least at the high altar of the cult, though even now her autumn shows grim signs of its approach. In Sunrose, Serathasme, and Pleyel, the luscious Yaal stands quietly by her side, still young enough to wait for her high day, the time when she herself, one dazzling night of shooting stars, will succeed Libidel. A discovery not hitherto foreseen was made by Isagel, the woman pilot. One morning she sat quietly in the Gupta room where she was working on her gender graphs. She called out suddenly and bade me come to the gender table where, at lightning speed, she caught and sealed provisionally her finding. She shrieked for joy and pressed to her heart the lively, struggling inspiration which, safely delivered now, had been conceived through love of the law of great numbers. When I studied this child, I could see clearly that it was healthy, with the strength of form which always characterizes Isagel's work in the world of higher mathematics. If this discovery had been made in Doris, if only Doris's valleys could have been a dwelling place for artisans of numbers, it would have made a great sensation at once and deeply changed the Gupta calculus. And as we sat and discussed with each other the possibilities this discovery would have opened, if only we had not been here in space, trapped in the emptiness we were falling through, we both grew sorrowful, but still retained the desire born of pure thought, the kind of joy which we could quietly share together during the time still left to us in life. But now and then my Isagel would weep to think of this overwhelming, endless space where everything can only fall forever, as she herself must fall, and must fall with her this great problem, now solved and clearly mastered. The Space Sailor's Story. The transport to Tundra 3 took some 9 years. Evacuation gonned as much as 10. I was myself on board the 8th Goldonda. We flew alternately with other spaceships, Benares, Canton, Gond, and a few more. In about 5 years we moved 3 million fear-stricken humans to the novel planet. Those memories throb like raw sores, mostly memories of the embarking times. The same frantic scenes repeated every time when tears and anguished prayers were blended with the gay songs of Green Dad space cadets, when the day's quota of refugees from Gond is hustled complete with index passports and identity discs away from all the sin and shame of Earth. They shiver and, in spite of all, recoil. But, forced on by the weight of their own numbers, they come to the Goldonda's human corrals, where a few hardened Venus vets examine them and, with a rollicking wink, tease them with "ha ha ha" and "welcome home to heaven's kingdom from Jerusalem." All apprehension is explained away until each index card has been adapted to the soul it represents through tests and then placed in the micro rolls which automatically register every plus and every minus. And so they lift for heaven's endless reaches to be hardened on the tundra planet's beaches. Others to Venus's quagmires are transported. What happens in both places is well known. In murky mines imprisoned crouch the peoples who, used and misused like mere articles, are sorted out and driven roughly down to the caverns at Igol. Inconceivable, this form of torture defies description both in words and pictures, with stony executioners in daily charge of locks, of taps, electrical switches, and glass-constructed peepholes trained upon the caverns, beside whose outer walls the serfs of death, unblinking, sluggish and unmoved, peer in with chilly devil's eyes to follow the captive's struggle against walls of stone. Now let's go on, too late to draw back, to Tundra 2, where the plexi barracks are, where Nobby and I once planned to wander in the Martian landscape's ray-untainted spring. There proudly flourishes the black ice tulip, impervious to the marshy planet's chill, while on the tundra the throaty cockerel crows its saga of the tundra's sterile state. Pathetic, starved, and yet by all revered, that bird knows much about both cold and need. The only form of growth is Arctic willow, if we may pause to think of vegetation, struggling, dwarf, hard as wrought iron, with black, inedible, unappetizing leaves, well hardened for these frore bare fields, digestible only by the cockerel, whose gizzard is connected with a chain of stomachs. And when it gorges on these scanty leaves, it seems as though one had heard the key twining finally in the door of life. For all one then can see is the shuttling gizzard, and when the bird swallows, one watches, fascinated. It sometimes even wrings a laugh from one. Yet to this land of poverty and hardship my Nobby was attached with all her soul, for bitter years of want set other standards than those applied when nature is benign. Among the scrapings of the frozen planet in the willows sighing, she found fortitude. She wandered on the moors and sang of spring, when the cold grew milder and the cockerel crew and willow trailers crept across the tundras, hungrily stretching to a half-grown sun. She often sent odd willow leaves to earth, and wrote, leaves from the forests of the soul, "Behold, spring winds blow o'er the spirit's fields, my heart brims over. No doubt you can guess why. These were the days when evil Gond was twisted into a spiral by the phototurb, a seething coil of fiery gases, a town in headlong flight through Doris's valleys. Against all that, the extreme coolness and icy air surrounding Tundra, too, was surely preferable, and the cockerel's scraggy and wizened shape might seem a bluebird. No wonder Nobby found contentment there, in comparison with Earth's blackness. The girl herself was clever indeed to wrest anything out of this existence. I don't think there were more than 2 kinds of life on the whole planet. Picture her wandering among the prison barracks, where crowds of rough men, like starving wolves, tear off the saucepan lid and strive to devour the cockerel, skinny and uncookably tough, which defies every trick of tundra cuisine. But Nobby was a girl unlike all others. She found it meaningless to blame men who would soon be buried in the tundra, forgotten by their fellows. Nobby's existence was clearly reflected in the mirror, in no way polished up or glorified, yet never sullied by the despairing look every prisoner, shocked and frightened, gave to the impassive glass. I love to linger with the happy memory of this courageous woman who took part in everything once known as suffering and sacrifice, but now called something more prosaic, for when the altar gets too blood-stained, the thin veneer of holiness falls off. That was the last spring that nature bloomed. She died that very spring, stricken by a wind which blew hot hurricanes between the mountains and with great thunder filled the land of Rind. A sunclap sounded, lightning through its forkings. I still can hear the screaming, "Sombra, sombra," of human beings, already dazed and blinded, who fled towards their God in search of succor. They did not know God, too, was in the flame of substances which, blasted and polluted, punished Shinombra with primeval fire. The power of matter was all-engulfing. The unforgettable years came upon us when everything was flooded by it. One saw souls trying to maintain a stand, helped by their heritage of faith, but the giant outflow drowned them one by one. The faith and principles held in their hearts were robbed of meaning by the flood, the drama of their own lives swallowed up and drowned in the general, all-overwhelming wave of impotence. They were reduced to cells within a state which made demands upon them as before, but now without caring that it had destroyed the moral being from which it craved a tribute. And thus a human being condemned to exile far away on Tundra too knew damn all of the nature of his crime, but all the more about the giant's grim demands, and about the hopeless fate awaiting him in the jaws of a mine and in the giant castle made of glass which, for the sake of ceaseless supervision, rotated at the Sezioni mineshaft's edge in the town of Antalex, metropolis of this land of punishment. God's kingdom never was of that dark world, and receded further as the years rolled on, and those who could made their way to the heavens with bodies first when souls were barred. And we observed how many a tough tyrant surged up in time from these valleys down on Rind. We had to contend with boorish, ruthless fellows who used their elbows to get through the Goldonda gate. Surely the pious should have stood together against such fellows and shown their teeth in time. But their desire for peace at any price was far too great, and ruffians soon gave them their quietus. And unassuming souls in every country, taken by surprise, died at their rough hands. The shy and timid and the gentle-mannered were often left marooned in gamma-poisoned parts, and found another way of reaching heaven. They never found their way to Mima's halls. A sailor of the spheres, I saw this happen. I, who for 30 years have cruised in space between the Earth and the bare, barren tundra. A job like this is bound to leave some trace. During the years one's memory collects such facts, none of them based on anything but truth. Without the precious image of my Nobby, what would life have been worth to me? For love of others, she has sown and washed for tundran prisoners in pure self-denial. That is why I have told you the tale of Nobby, the Good Samaritan. The Child. Cikada sat in her most fruitful year in deepest bliss beside a tiny bier, where lay the little rosy bud that she had saved from growing up in Aniara's realm. Then entered Yael, she too at her prime. She saw the fair dead child upon its bier, and said in tones that were both hard and clear, "You are going home, but we must stay on here in Aniara's realm." Then Gina came in too, declaring, "To you, my child, I will in reverence go, and play no part, but stand here without guile, before you who, released from sin and wrong, sleep quietly in Aniara's realm." Yael tiptoed out. Then Heba took her place. She could say nothing, only stood and gazed, watching the tiny child so peacefully sleep on in space, borne towards the day of days, borne on, away from Aniara's realm. While Mima lived, we were as trolls who, crowding about Mima, chose to see and hear, without any risk, all the woe and struggle in the land of Gond, and who, whenever excitement ran high and the taste of blood was salt in every mouth, urged Mima's guardian to switch the knobs and change the picture, taking another wavelength to see something new. Our menu thus became a balanced diet, in which death at sunset, alternating with happiness at dawn, answered questions which in fear and torment were broadcast from some far remote city. The reconciliation of opposites then appeared as something pretty good, and the land of Gond, a country which had seen better days, but was laid open now to evil's sway. Making full use of Mima's incorruptible eye, we shared all the sensations of Shenombra, when, during our space travels, we changed others' agonies into mere sounds and pictures. And although Mima, at Shenombra's fate, was seen to shudder at once at Dorisberg's, we travelers watched the Holocaust, the hyena in us getting its full due. We joined the lion, risk-free, as he pounced, and, growling, wiped out qualms of conscience. The number of slaughters we saw in this way, the number of battlefields we wallowed in, is legion. Though we could see the fallen lie before us, we trampled on in order to be present at the next phase of the battle. Our faithful Mima reproduced it all relentlessly, without any censoring, and if sometimes we turned quite stiff with terror and felt horrified by many a deed, the deeds themselves were actually so many that memory retained only the very worst. These were known as the extremes, and then lost in the tide of horrors flowing between. In Hall Number 7 is the blue archive of thought, but seldom visited, though there are things there that can bear long talking about still. There a man stands, called the friend of thought, ready to teach each one who may so wish the elements of the laws of thinking. He points in sorrow to a set of thoughts which might have saved us had it been used in time for cultivation of the spirit, but which, since spirit was lacking, was put aside in some forgotten lumber-room. But as our emptiness here was never-ending, there were always some who came and asked to see an occasional ancient train of philosophy, which might, they imagined, be given a new significance and occupy the mind a little. The cynic, who is always close to hand to calculate our minimum of hope, is ahead of every flight of thought and pulverizes the goal of our hopes in ways so comic that the thought itself somersaults and falls like a skater on sheer ice. But then the brain laughs, as the brain will do, like an intellectual snob caught out in a slip of thought, or as a savage quite nonplussed by calculations. A shrug mimicking his victims in the past is the cynic's sole answer, or an icy grimace, reflex of his bitter loneliness. Daily we listen to the phonodiscs, coins supplied to all on board and played by the finger speakers worn on our left hands. We exchange discs of many different values. Everyone plays whatever he has, and though a space dime scarcely weighs an ounce, it sings like a cicada on every hand, grown soft and white through lack of useful work. Thanks to this device, we still retain some little contact with the past. The Goster penny still croons out its rondi, and the Rindle penny still tunes up its gondi. Her hand held close by her lovely cheek, and the finger speaker murmuring in her ear, sits Heba, listening idly to a space dime. She gives a sudden shiver, changes the coin, and soon a stream of Jurgian music fills her head. I asked her later, when I went my round, why she had trembled. I heard, she told me, a cry for help, a prayer for mercy, a scream transmitted through the disc from Gond. A philosopher of point sets, nay, a mystic of the school of transfinite numbers, often comes, his question card completed, to the Gopta center, then quietly bows to clear-eyed Isagel and tiptoes out in Aniara's hall. And Isagel, who finds the question reasonable, accepts his flock of formulas and readjusts them to the third thought combination of the Gopta table. And when she has transformed the group of numbers and carefully Goptated tensor classes, she places them upon the Gopta wagon and harnesses it to the space lackey, Robert, our brain's trust's faithful ox. When the philosopher himself comes back, the only thing that Isagel can say is that, despite all Robert's frenzied efforts, no Gopta can explain the problem set, for the question concerns the frequency of wonders in the cosmos, gauged by point-set mathematics. But it appears that chance and miracle have a common source, and consequently the same answers would seem valid for both. And then the point-set man, as we have called him, bows sorrowfully in quiet acceptance and tiptoes off to Antiara's halls. A poetess appeared within our world, and the beauty of her songs lifted us quite out of ourselves into the world of spirits. She gilded our drab prison bars with fire, brought heaven to the dark rooms of our hearts, changing each word from smoke to red-hot flame. She had come to us from the land of Rind, and the strange myths woven about her life warmed us like sacred wine. She herself was blind from birth, a child of 1,000 nights without a trace of day, yet her blind eyes seemed in themselves to hold the depths of a dark well, the nucleus of all song. And the miracle she brought with her was the game of the human soul with language, the visionary's play with joy and sorrow. And we were enraptured by her songs of bliss, and blinded by the glory she revealed in the infinity of space, where she, though blind and trapped by night, composed the songs of Rind. The Blind Poetess. The long road I've come from Rind to here has the same night color as the paths I trod in Rind itself, dark as before, dark as always, but our darkness grew cold. Therein lay the difference. All accustomed darkness deserted me, and against my forehead and against my breast, which was a part of spring, The cold darkness struck and stayed forever. A dreary moaning from Kine's aspens surged in the night. I began to shiver. This was in autumn. Some spoke of the fire of maples. Some whom I heard passing praised the sunset hues on a nearby valley. They said it was crimson, pale with spreading rays, purple in the evening. Against it, forests flamed in the night. They told, too, how shadows under the trees gradually whitened after frost, as though grass were summer's hair, rapidly aging. So they described to me the look of things. A silvering of hoar frost and gold that flashed and glimmered each time sunnier paid her debt to her gray creditor, the cold. And autumn's gay extravagance was also painted, all gold thrown into summer's grave. This faming grandeur, so they said, had the gaudiness of a gypsy funeral, with its riot of red and yellow streamers and gilded banners brought from Ispahan. But I myself stood still and cold there in the darkness, and only felt all that was near to me vanish before a dark and icy wind, while the last shudder of the aspen leaves told me that in the land of Rind summer would soon lie dead. Then the wind changed, and in the night a terrible black heat swept in. I fell into the arms of one who came running. That frightened me. How could I tell in the hot darkness who it was? He caught me as I fell and held me, whether a devil or a man I knew not, while the rumbling increased and the hot wind, black as before, grew to a tempest. He who held me shouted frantically, in a voice which yet seemed far away, "Protect your eyes. It's coming. It will blind you." I made my own voice as loud as I could and shouted back at him, "I am already blind. I have never seen." Then he let me go, ran for his life. I cannot say where, in the hot blast of darkness, which was suddenly swallowed up by fearful thunderclaps crashing towards me, a blind woman. I fell again, began to crawl, and struggled on through Rhine's forests. At length I reached a stony crevice where no trees fell and the heat was not too great. There I lay, almost happy between stones, and prayed to Rhind for help. And through the roaring mirabile dictu, someone came to my pit, and carried me away to a dosed carriage, and conveyed me through the night to Rindon's airfield. There was a refugee committee there, nigh stricken dumb, their voices cracked by tiredness and shouting. I whispered my number and name, and they told me to follow the crowd which surged to the Goldonda exits. The years which followed sealed my fate, for on the Martian tundra I learned how, as a messenger from Rind, to soften the guards with my songs of grief over a cruel doom. By touching faces with my hands, I learned to tell great sufferers from others, and at length returned to Rind to gather, by my singing, money for the tundra refugees. The land in Rind was bare. All vegetation stunted, but iron wills insisted on their plan to save some ground with a new substance the scientists had given them. Geosan, they called it. How this worked, I do not know. Many said it was a complete failure. Man to man, the plan was defined as something everybody hoped for, but no one could achieve. Thus I left my home, the source of all my songs of Rind. I applied for a post as singer in the 3rd saloon. There I work now. I sing Alas the Valley and Tiny Bird in the Bower of Roses, as well as the cast-iron ballad which the Gondians so often sing aboard our space Goldonda. Each fight for heaven is a fight for joy. The goal of every heart is paradise. How fearful, then, if treacherous influences lead and persuade the selfish and the angry into this fight, thus darkening our way with banners of hate, revenge, and malice. How hard it is for man to feel a keen and natural desire to maintain truth. How hard it is to know one's duty early. How hard to join in mass at the high altar, invoking so a God of whose strange laws we know no more than that he suffers deeply in every act that does not wholly please him. How hard to fuse one's faith with daily living. How hard to understand God's sacrifice. How difficult in secret not to wonder, has not the blood of sacrifice run dry, and why are executioners still with us? How difficult in secret not to wonder. How hard to understand the words of mercy for us who have never spoken with the dead, or had an answer from the grave, where fairies never tiptoe in with wands, where only one has burst the bonds of death to meet his God, while all the others, blind and silent in the foulness of dissolution, must lie in dust until the judgment day. How hard to trust in life beyond the grave. How right to wish for life beyond the grave, for this is proof of joy in living, and the desire to taste life's beauties further, not just to die like fireflies on the shore. How right to show an honest joy in living. How right to value living over death. How harsh the grip of the tomb. How easy to trust in life beyond the grave. Committed to the earth they lie in ranks, in the blind ground beneath the winds of spring, and there in unison they join the chorus of all the blind chanting the songs of Rind. With limbs already mouldered into dust, they praise each day in song the God who, although blind, knows all and never needs to see, the bodies to which he granted spirit. Slowly the flesh will crumble into dust, only the bones endure. But time goes on, and soon even the bones will mingle with the earth, and soon their song choir will dissolve into the treetops, from where every leaf will tell the winds that pass how death hidden in summer sings for joy. Forgetful of itself, the summer fades, so too the spirit of life, elusive as delicate summers which have flowered away to come again with every changing year. We listen, entranced, while the blind girl speaks. Some murmur as they stand, "What gracious words she tells her story in! What gracious words come from the land of Rind! But they are only words, born on the wind." Sandown, the high comedian, refreshed and delighted all of us the light years had touched and blighted. When the blaze of our sun was turned away from the outcast group, Sandown stood up to our paralyzed loss of hope. And in the whole of our joy, in the glare of strange suns after, Sandown the clown would explode with bursts of his ludicrous laughter. And we bawled, "Bravo!" when he came on stage with his three-legged trolley, and he shouted madly back at our plaudits, volley on volley. But the grave is a joker too. Clowns all go off stage by and by, and Sandown, comedian, has gone to his grave in the streams of the sky. Sandown the clown, used up, worn down, gave up his art, his breath, under the heavy burden of human fate, to the lunatic death. A lady of the world, a graceful gold leaf on a delicate branch of the nobility of Yidis, exquisitely formed, her hair parted to show one half blue, the other black, with a gleaming jeweled comb of rarest Yabian fire agate in the upward sweep of her high crown of hair, describes to another Yedian lady how from a palanquin above the heights of Gaining she once looked out across the inland sea of Setokaidi and watched the moon sail up, a figured lantern, dripping with autumn gold. I came upon these ladies one day when sorting fragments of the Mima and working with them in solitude. Once upon a time, the Mima must have shown their features, catching the serene beauty of the Yettis-eyed, echoing the language they once spoke by Setokides' inland sea. Alas, that Mima is extinct. Alas, the mighty one is dead. I cannot understand it. It is inexplicable. The goddess crushed by grief, and we are damned. Look at her, sweeping past, draped in the appropriate sleekness of the latest fashion, surely forever worthy to remain by seas that curve from Teb to Cape Atlantis, an Aphrodite with eternal life, untouched by time and salt. Do not believe it. That woman has been dust 4 million years, and nothing, not even the great age of culture which gave her birth, has left the faintest trace. What radiance! Lord God, how do you do it? Look at those graceful modern clothes. Heba, do you see that gorgeous belt and mark the tailoring of the waistline? What testimony to woman's genius for making her clothes live their own life in time, throughout the seasons, a life so subtly and beautifully molded that its true background is the sea by Cape Atlantis. Lord God, how do you do it? Whose is the sharpest pain? Thine, who harvests all. Ours, who see and know how all is harvested. Thy mighty power, our helplessness. Switch off. Let's go back to our Jurg. Did you notice the cut of that dress might well be used in our Tanny line, the Yib, the Sessi Yedi, and other tailoring from Dorisberg? The spear. In the 11th year we saw a vision, the slenderest, the tiniest of sights, a spear that traveled through the universe. It came from the same direction as our Golconda, and did not swerve aside, but held its course. Its speed was greater than that of the Golconda, and consequently the spear rapidly drew ahead of us. Afterwards we sat for a long time in groups, talking excitedly to one another about the spear, its path, its origin, what it portended. But no one knew, and no one could know. One made a guess, but nobody believed him. In some way there seemed nothing to believe. As an object of belief, the sight was meaningless. It merely whizzed across the universe. The spear of emptiness went on its aimless course, but even so this spectacle had power to change the minds of many of us. 3 went quite mad. A 4th one took his life. Another set up a new sect, a noisy, boring, unaesthetic crowd who long disturbed the peace in Aniara. And thus, in spite of all, the spear had pierced us. Cheffone's garden. In order to keep in touch with the core of inventors, the leaders entertained them to dinner in Perpetual Spring, a winter garden of a type often seen in Golcondas and popularly called Flying Gardens of Space. The best of humanity mounts guard there over life, tiny gardens of Eden where nothing withers or dwarfs, and where, among blossom and greenery, a man can find rest from the glassy technique and cold, staring darkness of space. There sit our leaders now, absorbed with the inventors in how best to safeguard Perpetual Spring, and how to cultivate still more of delicate life and protect our inherited share of the gardens of space. First they all looked about them, out there in the wondrous park, framed by pillars and archways, merged with the grass-covered earth. The illusion was such that the spring heaven glowed, and the stream ran a carefully planned circle in the shade of enchanted green hedges. The dove fluttered high to the heaven last seen by our eyes. A nude woman sat by the hyssop-blue risings. With her gracefully curved breasts, in a posture enhancing her beauty, she seemed to me wonderfully fair, for the evening was near. Yes, that woman was lovely indeed, a delight to the eye, and just for this reason I moved even closer to see. Yet, in spite of the wines I had recently tasted, the sight of such beauty has rarely awakened such pain in my breast. I rubbed at my eyes, half believing I was still not fully awake, for this was the nymph of the mountain, the prey of the dragon. The hackneyed old song which nobody now wanted to sing was suddenly apt in the oceans where Goldandas swim. We can dismiss the sage after noting the woman is nude, but who can dismiss magic mountains, make light of the dragon? Still, as guest of the leaders, I wanted at least to find out how dragons behave, how they function, what they are about. I said to her, "Beautiful creature, so lovely, so naked, does the park you are in belong by some chance to the dragon?" She answered, "I come of the people in hellfire, who once shouted Sombra, and you of the people who blasted all life in Shinombra. I hate all your people as deeply and fiercely as I treasure every tree, every plant in these space-circling gardens of pleasure." And then, as I stood there, the halls of Chiffone darkened, and shame added its weight to my woeful load of sorrows. I shrank from the look the woman slave threw me, and nothing that happened thereafter had any importance. I bowed to her silently, made my way back to the path where a myriad birds winged their songs to the dome of the sky. I guessed that Chiffone had no thought of me or my place as I tiptoed away from the flying gardens of space, but my thoughts lingered long with that woman, so graceful and naked, and for long I felt shame, as though I in myself were the dragon. On the planetarium deck, domed by the arch of a plexi roof, transparent to the sky, lifts are unloaded of those who wish to stroll at leisure to and fro upon the star deck and watch a nova's fire, the glow of which comes to us from the coils of Berenike's hair. And the astronomer, modest in his knowledge, describes to us how the universe plays dice in distant solar systems with the scalding novas, which, tired of ceaselessly offering gifts to the great photophags, suddenly break down and in extremes of fury hurl the last flames of an expended passion on to the photophags in different waves. A dandy who deserves a thrashing listens with contempt, and in a drawling and degenerate voice which instantly reveals the Gondian, passes a comment of deliberate disgust which drops and dwindles to a sneering whisper on a level with his weary space grimace, and the astronomer, chilled to silence by this, mutters apologies and ends the evening's viewing of the sights to be seen in outer space. One day I met Chiffone in the passage which leads into the third Gupta hall. Scornfully he asked me, "What about the songs of cuckoo and thrush this year from Doris? Had the Mima overcome her trifling ailment? I saw that you searched wildly and long below her breast to find the cause of trouble. Perhaps you found the right spot in the end?" I stammer out a scared Goldandic greeting, report to him that Mima died of grief, despite her visionary powers seeing no salvation for those imprisoned in this hold of death. And then Chiffone laughed as though he saw sights that were comic here in Mima's hall. I felt like collapsing in my dumb despair at thought of my lost home in Doris's valleys. But Chiffone, impatient, bored by tears, strides on, and I am left there, stiff and frozen, remembering the time when 1,000 springs turned to eternal winter in Mima's hall. Is there still any hope of our salvation in Aniara, now that she is dead? I search for comfort, look in every corner, but all in vain, as vainly do I test advice and visions too. One day, Libidel lay prostrated by the drug she had placed on her tongue. We sang by her grave while the flames leaped to encircle one no longer young. Our shuddering conscience contracted, frost-touched, in the cynical heavens, and our stainless steel vault was sealed up in seas where love's splendor had faded. A religion strongly rivaling the cult has grown up in the torment of our darkness. Its adepts worship light as an ideal, and fire, the goddess of their sect, is a pure flame. The girl from Rind was chosen for this role, and the choir bellows like a great wind when she, the singer, whose own sight is gone, appears before the altar clad in light. She chants her hymns about the god of light, and tells how she who once lived on Rind looked into light and saw it with her skin. The vision seared her. This is what it means to feel one's skin scorched by the fire of God. Ecstasy seizes her. No one can clearly hear what she is saying, but a vast choir of voices carries her as on the crest of a wave. Placed among 1,000 lights, the blind saint in fireproof mantle made of silicates, surging towards the barrier of the photophag, pleads with shrill cries for light, more light, on Rind. I often wandered towards the hall where this sect met, for its spirit moved me, as it did many on our long journey through darkness. A mass of repentance is held in the hall of memory, and those of us who feel deeply contrite foregather there, our foreheads strewn with ashes, torturing ourselves with dirges of penitence. Prepare for doom. The walls of wrath are closing around our fate, the fate we brought upon ourselves. Our punishment is but the mirror reflex of those tortures we invented long ago. When no excuse distorts the picture any longer, the image in the glass itself is Hades, and mirrors scorch you. Best keep your hands off. They reflect what was said and done. Day after day I hear the dreary chanting of hideous songs by these gray fakirs of contrition and feel revolted. For who can rival the degradation they thus impose on themselves? For me, a more important question is to find some means of healing Mima's broken spirit and recreating the celestial membrane ruined by space waves from the darkened Earth. Many an overwrought inmate of the spaceship will listen gladly to the tranquil voice of Aniara's astronomer as he tells the tale of pre-Goldondic days and the Glacion. He points out, then, how meaningless it is to speak about a cosmic clock of doom, since the rhythm of cosmos follows quite other patterns of time than those we knew on Earth. For generations which should have been punished had already slept 1,000 years in the deserts when space, using the scourge of frozen climate, struck mankind with an ice age. Quietly he explains, with sober illustrations, the course of the most recent glacion when the Gundilder of the 23rd century in the ice climb slithered from his throne. Man was busy just then with the millennium, whose dawn, however, was overcast by wars. He was about to till the earth again when all human plans were suddenly crushed and broken. For the frozen nebula of Golmos met the sun, which started then upon a pilgrimage through Golmos's night, and Golmos's shadow play chilled our world with the moan of glacial winds. The heavy cap spread out across the earth a circumpolar covering. So great countries were clad in ice many kilometers thick. Not only Arctic snow came moving down, the hexagons of frozen convolutions, but cosmic snow, too, from the nebulosa, turning winters into eons. An icy crust concealed the lands of Europe, which, hidden under huge sheets of ice, were bedded down for 16,000 years, deprived of every ray of sunshine, and people in these countries carried their technical skills as far south as possible, making some resistance for a while, then sank frozen into a barbarous coma. So, through a period of 12,000 years, man was a savage, who, armed with fragmentary memories of technology, waited to see the sun return again to kindle the woods of nature and realms of culture. Succeeding generations turned the wheels and spun the threads in primitive workshops, where they were re-educated for hard living and accustomed to Ice Age conditions. The nebula of cold now passed the sun, yet to humans in pre-Goldondic days it seemed for 15 centuries like a mourning veil, a titanic cloth of coal-black satin, which every evening rolled across the heaven, darkening the galaxies with its widow's weeds. In time, this dark cloth passed further off, and being, by cosmic standards, small, it lost, as it grew more remote, its first resemblance to a mourning veil, and hardly more than 11,000 years after the centuries when the sun left Golmos and continued on its way to renewed glory, this somber patch had almost disappeared from the center of a heaven refreshed. By then the ice had melted, and new races tasted the blessing of clear springs in Gond. I invented, with the utmost difficulty, a screen composed of 2 sorts of rays, and found a way of hanging this, as it were, out in space, some 9s from the Goldonda, and towards this space screen then I could send a 3rd sort of ray which transmitted pictures. In this way I contrived to establish the illusion of a wall in space, a kind of frieze stretched out there and made up of pictures of forests and moonlit lakes, mountains, and cities. Sometimes I introduced a mighty army of people carrying banners of victory, all to make a seeming wall which could shut out the intolerable void. Later I built up yet another wall, this time on another side, and in between these 2 resplendent walls of dense illusion our spaceship glided, well screened from the immense and gaping gorges which could no longer stare in at us, as they'd done for the last 9 years, stinging us like lances, pricking us like needles. But even such tapestries of fantasy need the support of some human will, at least, the contribution of some secret dreams from those who only crave but never give us anything but emptiness, a void which must be constantly filled and embellished. And now this emptiness turned against me, pursuing me to dark corners of the ship, threatening my life when I could not explain at once why emptiness remained. I saw then how things are and how they were. No one can hide his inner emptiness. Mima had been smashed against the waves of time like Humpty Dumpty on his famous wall. No one could mend poor Humpty Dumpty then. Still less have I any chance of mending you. Your emptiness is terrifying indeed. I keep on conjuring, but at bottom the effort is hardly worth the trouble. But you contribute nothing of your souls, and so the pictures faded clean away. We turn the wheel of routine. I lecture space cadets on the science of the Gupta. Through the observation tower, suns peer in at us. They seem motionless, though we know that with thunderous roar they sway and rotate in everlasting night on pyres of Röntgen light. And while in my mind's ear I hear them sound like terrible war drums in the long battle, light wages against darkness without end, I hear my own voice making feeble sounds in answer to my question on the Gupta. Only by re-evaluation of the new era and new extensions of the tensor calculus was it possible to find a means of discovering the split-up symmetry which through the formula of 5 divided by 3 was simplified and turned to real advantage in every tour made by the Gupta chariot. And then the space cadets got up to go in perfect line into the hall, where the next teacher, worthy and placid Giles, speaks to them about Golconda buildings. A woman from Gond, now a widow, was often seen with her husband on the star deck. For years they'd sit there with their bundles strapped ready as though expecting a landing, though many looked at them with irony, which grew colder and colder as time went by. Nevertheless, these two maintained a touching expectation, gazing serenely on towards the Lyra. Still in their fond minds lingered the scent of thyme fields they'd known, and of bread she'd once baked in the ovens they'd been forced to leave behind in Gond. How many thousand times these two had studied heaven's prospectus, sitting close, absorbed, no mortal being here can tell, in space years which passed them by without a trace until they both grew gray at last, and she was left sitting there alone in quiet recollection of bygone days when they had lived together, safe in Gond, till a game of Jacob's Ladder was suddenly proclaimed by wailing sirens and forced their headlong flight through Doris's plains. Huddled close together on Golden's airfield, they took sad farewell of Doris's valleys, and with a parting prayer they laid their emigration problems in fate's hand. I used to notice how, for several years, the widow sat alone there, quiet and bowed, while we, who, with ingenious leadership, endeavored to guide fate's hand, began to despair of reaching the promised land. Hear us, Sjönombrians, who haunt you with memories. We who have passed on, and know, pursue you with visions. For several years Sjönombra's ashes floated gently down like snow. Each time you wake we stumble forward, our blackened arms holding up your shame. Sjönombra's pillar of ashes traveled across Rhind. It reached the coast on the 5th day, and came to Cape Atlantis on the 7th, but the survivors found no hope, no refuge even in the open sea, where jellyfish were seen to founder, and Octopedia rose dead from great depths. Like flowers of death, Sjönombra's ashes floated across the waters. Aquatic demons and angels swirled round together, all of them dead. Religion swam into men's thoughts, carried on the gulf streams of death. The holy stone of wisdom, hidden in the slaughter mask of genius, was shot into the heart of the city of Sjönombra, which died for the 3rd time. Oh, what a precious jewel was lost! We lowered a curtain of dreams, and between ourselves and memories of Sjönombra, a blessed forgetfulness filled with its own life sprang up. Thus magnified, transformed, our senses soared in a new girth, bent on adventure among the dimensions. An intolerable nucleus of pain dissolved. We felt quite clearly the point at which it burst and welled out, giving a nameless bliss in which Aniara was no more, and Chifone had died. No one knew how or cared. Relief pervaded us all so easily. Isagel was there also. Libidel and the Libidinians, with the 8 Dormifides, came gliding in, changed by the drug as though by dew in mountain glens at break of day. More and more deeply has each tortured soul drunk of the paradise I have here described, but every time our laudanum is drained, our visions of Eden quickly fade. Sjönombra's shrieking ghosts swarm in upon us, sworn to revenge their ravished city's fate. I am roused by a scream. It is Chabeba's. She stares at me with failing eyes, their brightness lost. They dim and die. "Oh, God!" she cried. "I can't bear to live where there is neither joy nor hope. How fearfully, how clearly I recall Sjönombra." Parched heat swept in from all directions, its climax, expertly prepared in torrid formulas, the phototurb which transformed all the air into stifling oven heat. It was in autumn refugees spread the tale of cool lakes where, in final agony, one might attempt to drown. It is all over now, and there is no one left to blame. The men responsible? All dead. The instigators in oblivion. The tools of power which held everything in a cast-iron grip were suddenly changed to ashes. All that could burn crumbled to ashes. The stones were glazed to a depth of 4 inches. In some places the glaze went even deeper. A foot or more of granite surface boiled. But humans were spared the sight of this. They had been whirled ahead, above, around, like shooting cinders. What happened inside the houses? Hardly anything. It was so quick there was scarcely time to grasp that it had happened. Imagine to yourself a bedside clock which, set to measure time in seconds, is taken unawares by its own dissolution and then boils up and whirls away as gas, all in the millionth part of 1 small second. Or the woman who lay asleep and unsuspecting and who, at the fatal instant, woke up and shivered. No! Spare our feelings, I hear you screaming. From the purgatory of repentance is heard the cry of sombra, like those which echoed in Shenombra. We felt ourselves drawn off our course and indulged the hope that an end was close in the unutterable vastness. New hope fired the veins of the ancients as they felt her lurch in her orbit. Among all who were weary of suffering and longed for the peace of nirvana, the cry rang, "She staggers! Our beauty!" She lurched once again from her course. Our innermost hopes found expression, and no one derided his neighbor when different doctrines and religions met up in the halls of the ship with pennants and crosses and emblems, prayer streamers, and the sign of the lotus. She violently lurched in her orbit again, and now hope was distorted by terror, but soon raised its banners again. We ran into something like a fog, which grew thicker every day, till on the 5th day it began to smolder against the ship's nose cone. Quickly thereafter strange new phenomena appeared. A rainbow-shimmering gauzy veil wrapped itself marvelously round the ship, covering it with a splendid spray of colors. Then a terrific display of fireworks dazzled all on board with blinding light. This festive image did not last long. We met resistance of an unknown kind next, and a hurricane of glowing particles induced stark terror. The fear of immediate death seized all of us. We all thought now of doom and death. The many thousands who had occupied the 4,000 rooms on the Golconda choked up the passages in their panic. At least 100 refugees from Gond were trampled under the assembly halls, and thousands were injured in other ways. The disturbances of gravitation which spread abroad sent waves of chaos through all our souls, when 1,000 vibrations, as from the impact of huge rocks, made every heart shudder, rousing such fear that nothing on the journey equaled the hideous terror which soon filled the halls and stairways, where crowding in itself caused death. A human mill, driven by human fear, grinding itself in swirling waves of madness. Like a spiral drill employed by Titans, the ship whirled up a cosmic sand cloud, which smoldered, glimmered, and was soon put down against the shuddering metals of the nose cone, and like a spuming top in flames, lit up as though by nearby suns, our ship plunged on, amid the thunderous roars of the surrounding matter, deeper and deeper into its gorge. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it was all over, and the Golconda fell along the loxodrome, which she retained in falling. What could it have been? The question rose. In spite of all our dead, it was put first. It seemed in some way most important for our fantastic world of fear still gliding on its customary course towards the Lyra. And now, among these dead and mangled bodies, the leaders were obliged to say what they believed and deemed a probable explanation. A cloud of cosmic snow, perhaps, the ice of some strange substance, cosmic crystal powder adrift for centuries, some form of eternal snow drifting about in space for 1 billion years, searching for a mountain to rest upon, to rest up in peace. The passengers accepted this hypothesis, bowed themselves, and gathered up their dead, whose souls, having reached the haven of peace, had become cool as the snow which finds its resting place on mountains of the spirit. But much was changed thereafter in the life we led within that world which now was ours, the Hall of Mirrors, which for 4 long years had nourished our illusion, lay in ruins. 1,000 shattered fragments, heaped in drifts, littered the floors once used for dancing, and cut to pieces between jagged splinters lay many a beauty struck down by the Jurg. The cloud had danced in space with our Golconda. With jewels placed high upon her hip lay Heba, and Daisy still as beautiful, while Yaal lay dead beside the wounded Chebeba. This all befell in the 12th year after our takeoff from Doris's valleys. Back to featureless every day, we drifted on, following as before the streams of Gazilnut, the name given to that lobe of our galaxy which, in contrast to other lobes, can be described in human star terms, which does not mean that Gazilnut can be mastered or contained within the boundaries of human life. No, Gazilnut just means, as things stand, a smaller lobe measuring 4 galactaves. 1 galactave is 15,000 light-years wide. In Astronavin, one usually reckons that the entire Milky Way covers a span of some 800,000 galactaves. No, save us, please. The torment of trying to explain in measurements the vastnesses into which Aniara has been plunged. The Space Mariner. Every time I try to check my memoirs, it seems to me that I can trace Nobia to Tleiloktitli, a tiny hospital base in the mountains of Doraima. This is a town which no one sees, where hospitals are blasted into rock. An old, deserted mine was once donated for the building of this town, which, after some needed reinforcement of the mountain and alteration of its inner structure, was established at a depth of 1,500 feet under the valley. I journey in thought now, more and more often to this place, which the Samaritans, with their money-box funds, have bought and built themselves. They say it costs something like the sum of 3 million dima, in Gondic currency 500,000 gondi, in Rhindic phonocoins 5 million rondi. They collected this money for 11 years. They built, as deep as possible, for safety, a reserve station among Doraima's mountains. When one has lived long among fiends, such goodness is like an exotic garden, whose fruits evince its real nature, and single happiness is voiced by cuckoos singing in the gardens of the heart. Time went on. Years came and vanished in the cold and glassy reaches. Life grew gradually more timeless for most people, as they huddled, peering from the lofty windows, half expecting that some planet would break loose from its companions, head towards them, and come closer. Children grew up, played and gamboled on the tundras of the exiles, on the moldering ballroom floorboards, now grown shabby and uneven. Modern times breed modern customs. Jurg was long ago forgotten, and poor, dance-demented Daisy slept forever in her corner of the vault where only honored prima ballerinas lie. I myself sat quietly thinking of the glorious Karelia, where I once lived long ago, where I lingered through a lifetime, spending more than 30 winters, more than 29 summers before seeking other countries, meeting other fresh adventures on the path of transmigration. Memories return in flashes. Here in Cosmos, there's no barrier. Ages merge, and I still see fragments from the different countries of my soul's long pilgrimage. Fairest of these memory pictures are the glimpses of Karelia, like a blue streak between tree trunks, like the paling summer waters in the June translucent twilight, when an evening scarcely deepens ere the cuckoo sends its flute-like invitation to sweet Aino to swathe veils of mist about her, rise above the summer waters, go towards the soaring smoke wreaths, come to meet the cheerful cuckoo midst Karelia's murmuring winds. Oh, if one could take advice, good advice, from days long past, where laws are dead, whose fields time has burned away. Here I sit on Mima's halls, remembering that once I lived another life in which I learned wisdom from plain fare. Here I sit. Where is my mother? Here I sit. Where is my sweetheart? In a better world than this one? Was it because I used my knife that I may not have my dear one? Plunged it into my stepfather's chest as he smugly left the sauna, squeezing my girl's breast with his hand? Where did all that happen? I recall. I can still see the glen, the forests deep in Karelia, the land of sagas. Here I sit, with all those others who boast roughly of their worlds, what they did and how they fared sumptuously on the King of Stars. 90 centuries ago, one evening, I sat quietly in the glen with my sweetheart, just before it happened, before the god of judgment exiled me from Karelia's woodland glens. It is good that sometimes one forgets. Fortunate that memory only glimmers for a moment now and again, soothing to escape constant reminders of one's dreary pilgrimage. Best to watch and say nothing. Maybe divine guards are sitting here and listening. Who can tell? If I can endure, be patient, if in silence I repent, perhaps some far-off evening I may see the end of all my memories, reach the limit of my wanderings, and scrubbed clean and labeled worthy of the noble star of kings, settle, life a bird in foliage, deep in the Karelian woods. Libidella, secret song of melancholy. Does my dog sniff round your shadowy glen, Libidella, and my cat slumber in high disdain, soft purring Libidelle? Does my ear hear only its own refrain, Libidella? Does my home he in someone else's house, listening, Libidelle? Libidella, yield me your isthmus urn. Now let Stella Alpha lights dimly burn. Midst the riddle of Alpha Centaurus, we wonder and weep together. O nuda now in nudis glow, under Mandala's moon for two. Libidella, with me to Sirius turn. Nudinella, yield me your isthmus urn. The widow, so tantalizing, obsesses the thoughts of men. O nuda now in nudis glow, under Mandala's moon for two. Libidella, unclad in nudinelle, lift towards Stella, moon pale your nudibel. In the starlight of Alpha Centaurus, we pledge these toasts with our tears. O nuda now, in nudis glow, under Mandala's moon for two. Fear stares into a void that is too clear, interpreting without the aid of thought. So obvious is glassy death in Cosmos, so obvious the emptiness which eases our understanding of the meaningless. So obvious the shooting star of fear. My friend, you know too much without having had to ponder. So, while you slept, vast seas of space, mercilessly clear, drowned your illusions, and fear's own light blazed forth like a sun. A prize amounting to 10 million gondi, a sum of money eagerly desired, was promised to anyone able to turn our Goldanda round and point her nose cone back to Doris's valleys. But that was years ago. The prize today concerns the comfortress in Mima's hall. Ah, who can penetrate the Mima's secrets? Who can give the enchantress back her wand? This is our cry resounding in outer space. With statistical notes on my knee, I listen quietly to our space historian giving a lecture about the pioneers upon these seas, which, though conquered, have yet been the grave of many. In former days we ascended much more steeply. Icarus, for example. Yes, there were those who actually imagined that, given suitable leverage, one might be fired from a rocket pedestal and thus avoid the curving forces and fields of outer space. When this idea was finally discarded, after costing those wretched folk many sacrifices, for instance Thanatos, the second phase emerged, called Heaven's Ladder, when, in a succession of power thrusts, one could propel one's liner from the fields. This in itself was a method quite acceptable, albeit extravagant and not without its risks. The accident statistics we see here speak for themselves of the problems that were vital in those far-off days before space was deflowered. Compared with the curve of our own age, judged, too, by our modern methods of measurement, the curve of earlier days would seem deficient. We are entitled, in fact, to term it crude. We shudder when we see, through the ship's telescope, a coal-black sun, extinct, nameless, a sun in mourning in the graveyard of space, at once the blackened corpse and tombstone of a sun which once glowed in a firestorm at the Cape of Time, flinging its flames into the jaws of darkness until it was gradually, in accordance with the law of entropy, sucked up by the photophag, which left only cinders and shell behind, a gravestone on the empty plain of darkness, one of many thousand dark stones standing invisible in endless night in the cemeteries of space. This sun reflects no light, but shows itself as the eclipse of a few gathered stars which only a month ago were seen on this same spot, where now this murky sun stands out, sharp-contoured, like a jet-black coin, presenting in somber majesty a rounded profile against the gaslight of the nebula. It seems a dark circular mountain mass, in whose turgid grotto the spirit of the lamp died long ago in the embrace of darkness, and choked by dingy cinders, is kept frozen in a grave of light, in nameless oblivion. Our chief engineer, a man from Upper Gond, an acknowledged authority on Yesser tubing, collapsed at his post on Wednesday, the 15th of November. In view of his long years of service and important contributions to the science of Goldandas, his express wish to be entombed in a tube of rescue was granted, and he was duly shot off towards the star of Rigel. A large crowd followed his body to an antechamber where the tube of rescue stood on a catafalque and sang at parting, "Wide the embrace, the distant haven." Then they went away, and the antechamber was closed. One could hear nothing but the rumbling of the aggregate machinery when the capsule of death was hurled into its grave of light years. We came from Earth, from Doris's land, the jewel of our solar system, the only planet where life has found a land of milk and honey. Describe the landscape that was there, the days that dawned and darkened. Describe the men who there in beauty stitched the white shrouds of their race until God and Satan, hand in hand, from a defiled and poisoned land past plains and mountains, fled the face of man, the king of ashes. Far out on flaming horizons quivers an eye, a nucleus moving in pity, the distant star of love, magic, eternal. Every time it looks at the earth, a meadow springs up and blossoms. Pollen spreads day after day blithely through joyful summer. Flowers raise high from the soil a pageant of moving banners. The butterfly spreads its yellow draperies over the acuities of thistles. Bumblebees drone in the grass where the shadows of straws trace a pattern. Summer wind lingers, in passing, in swinging clusters of poppy. How elusive happiness is! A moment's sunburst in white-clouded summer. Far beyond sentiment, high above evil, summer's bright love star glimmers on flowering meadows, the first among midsummer blooms. What better reason than this to be carefree and pious? A growing sense of oppression affected many minds in the 19th year. I sat with a pen in my hand, making Goptic calculations concerning the traces of intensified radiation from the Lyra, which had some mysterious meaning. So, in our 20th year, we sat studying the light from the Lyra, Isagel interpreting traces of beta and gamma rays. The ironic winds of her soul, alternating with tremors of horror, joined forces with Isagel's breathing and merged in the waves of her tears. And all the romantic sorrows whose lachrymose floods roused ridicule now joined the commonplace needs in a darkness bereft of all joy. I gathered my Isagel closer, comforted by the warmth of her tears, for she was the only living warmth now left to me on board. And so towards the gleaming Lyra our ship sped on, her casing defaced with scars, mementos of the meteors we had met in the starry heavens. Isagel asked me not to sing, but in spite of this, I had to hear my own insensitive voice crooning about asbestos and silicates. For the shivering, sobbing girl, I sang of the theory of elasticity. I also sang of our honor deflowered and of our lost, irreplaceable goddess. Then Isagel gradually ceased her weeping, yet weeping may be no worse than other phenomena. This was in the 20th year of the journey we cursed in our hearts. An event of special note has been celebrated in space today. Our leaders ordered us to dress in our Sunday best in honor of the law of cosmos. We climbed up 100 steps, and all the 4,000 rooms in 230 halls were emptied in a flash. In the enormous central hall, known as the Hall of Light Years, which holds 10,000 people, the others and I met again. We saw for the first time how mercilessly the years had dealt with every one of us when under burning chandeliers we stood among the crowding masses known to you and me. It seemed as though the spirits of all Earth's people had gathered here today in the halls where songs by angel choirs and speeches by Goldandirs echoed and re-echoed. The chief Goldandir spoke to us about the great significance of this most solemn day. How mighty is the cosmos, how powerful in its secret, how puny am I. Then the chorus swelled out deep in the Hall of Light Years, and the people shuddered on the brink of the precipice of eternity. Many thousands wept, and a few hundreds said, "This is the law of fate." Our spaceship Aniara has been upon her journey full 20 years today, and many stood in silence till someone said abruptly, "A light year is a grave. Our 20-year-long journey is 16 hours of light away across the light-year sea." At this we did not laugh. No, nearly all. We wept. A light year is a grave. The chief Goldandir dismissed us with a flourish of his baton, and once again we went down the 100 steps, all treading very quietly. A light year is a grave. The flocks of exterior atoms on Nineveh's stones disperse with the passing of time from the seat of the mighty. Each stone is eroded in grooves and in forkings. One by one, the incised features of lions and priests crumble away. O scar-ravaged stones, keep them imprisoned. Do not let them vanish. Time has corroded and licked at the mane of the lion, like the manhood which ravished the virtue of Syria's women, like the saliva from rain which eroded the tower of Han. The vices of disintegration survive through the ages. Dissolution's carousal gives life to the rose on the grave, where the covetous tongue of the grass in depravity stretches. The nose of the stone wolf is gnawed by the lupus of caves. As stones fall to dust, so the law is corrupted by man. Every hypocrite furtively fears the sour stench of decay. When the clearness of insight pierces them, figs come into daylight like the dry, burnt-out holes in the lava which buried Pompeii. Hear the rusty trombones. Hear how the zitras are playing of the Sphinx, marred and ravaged by lepra above desert sands, to comfort the races which have seen all their customs disintegrate like boulders obscenely devoured by the merciless ages. Our chief astronomer showed us a picture of a galaxy which appeared to be receding, and many sank down on their knees and began praying, "Make it come nearer, Lord." They professed the religion of the Galactaves, and when I saw them praying, I recalled how Sister Nobia once described the wide, high plateau of Doraima, where the neighboring galaxy in Andromeda during clear nights ingeniously magnified in order to be seen from the rooftops of light cities, seemed to shine like a goldfish, outlined by a giant mirror stretching for miles to the people of Doraima. The galaxy swings round like a wheel of shimmering smoke, which is the light of stars, or sun haze. For lack of other words, you know, we call it sun haze. I mean just that languages do not suffice to express everything contained in that spectacle. The richest of the languages we know, Shinombric, has some 3 million words, but the galaxy you are watching now contains far more than 90 billion suns. Has any human brain ever mastered all the words in the language of Shinombra? Not a single one. Now you understand? And yet, do you? Song from Gond. Now comes a god of roses, for the day of the rose has come, and the goddess of the lilies is here too. How peaceful when men fall asleep! Look, curious fairies appear, and tints arc mixed in the cachets. The god of violets wants color. The day of the violets will come. We sink in the glens of the gods, turn to soil and to pistils and rays, and the gods will soon paint summer flowers on the canvas of our dissolution. The sooner we vanish and die, the less will the gods feel their sorrow. Our life melts away like the snow when summertime starts for the gods. Time passed. Change and decay began to show like wear and tear on the upholstery of chairs. Indolent minds and aimless, wasted spirits sat fettered by frustration, stupidly reclining in Goldonic comfort which had known better days, but which, owing to the laws of stress, was only a memory now. Boredom, the borderline between satiety and apathy, had long ago been reached and crossed, and now our souls turned back for solace to the sufferings which had marked our time. And novel words, the latest dance craze, followed close on each other, merely to sink, forgotten, in rapid streams of time, which swirled in sluggish currents towards the shores of death. The lazy brain became a burden to itself, and the spirits on the bookshelves never read, were seen to turn their backs on glutted minds which could no longer be disturbed by thought. Strange signs were visible in space, but since they could not be comprehended in the daily program, were soon forgotten. We came, for instance, fairly close one day to a strange sun, a half-extinguished neighbor of the one which shone so gloriously on Doris, and Isegel came in to me and said, "Dear friend, what do you think? Shall we, or not?" I replied that although the time seemed ripe, space was, after all, a question mark. It might be wiser, therefore, for some time yet to keep the moth away from the bright flame which offered itself here as our cremator. And Isegel left things at that, though her eyes blazed phosphorus with wrath, a wrath which at that time was pure and holy, and so behind the backs of our dull crowd she protected our space Golconda, Aniara. But our clear-eyed spirit Isegel broke down. A sickly demon came into her eyes. Her widening pupils sought the sources of the soul, and she heard cries and echoes from remote distances. She said that she had heard a voice which called her by a name she did not know, and that afterwards the same call had often sounded in the halls of Mima. It came from Mima's grave, and so one night, when everyone else was asleep, she obeyed the voice, crept to the graveside, and found sitting there a messenger from the mansions of eternity. I pretended to believe her, though I knew that Isegel, my friend, of all the things we'd met in space, had been pierced by a splinter when we collided with the Leonide. Thus it is not the wilds of space alone, nor the spiritual void through which we travel here, but also many a carefully guarded personal secret which deeply, cruelly wears down our courage. She suggested once, sitting thoughtfully, that she identified herself with Death, who, keeping watch in Aniara's night, measured the meager lifespans of the passengers. I thought at first this was a joke, such as imagined spleen, in deserts where there was no hope of rescue. But when I realized her trend of thought, I tried to turn her soul to different pursuits. The ruler of pure thought, our spirit's succor, thus prepared herself for the fields of glory. The deserts of space had no means of comprehending, but I understood in my heart how this had happened. Invisible to us, she glided quietly into the region of the laws of numbers, where endless unexplored reserves await us when the powers of chance decide the hour has come. When one we love has passed beyond death's door, space seems more cruel and somber than before. Our burden becomes heavier. We are crushed. Our soul will never again be released from the dead grasp of evil space. And so, from the picture archives, I take out all that I put aside from Mima's days, and Mima's hall turns into a crowded grotto, where fragments from the Mima's visions paint in colors of the afterglow a frieze, a sunset in the realm of Aniara. At one time, out of favor with Cefone, I was hunted by his men and then condemned for an indefinite time to the ship's deepest dungeon, in which only gangsters were usually confined. And yet I thought the day will surely come when Cefone, though he'll not do it gladly, must liberate his expert on the Gupta, and when that day comes, I'll be released. Almost as if in answer to my thoughts, a violent tremor passed through the Golconda. It was as if my Isegel had called me from the hidden kingdom where she dwells. And that same night, after the watch had ended, Isegel came to me in a dream of supernatural light which filled my heart with warmth beyond description. And being now an expert in the reading of signs, and able to deduce what power they have to generate new thoughts resembling the Mima's formulas, I saw now, filled with reverence, who she was. my Isegel, and why she still lingered so faithfully, harking to my questions, so that when need be she could answer me, and it dawned on me then that Isegel, the fair and glorious bride of my own mind, in this space world beyond the god of life, was Mima's very self, was Mima's soul. In Aniara's Gupta vault, equipped with aerials, tremors of Isegel-like sensitivity caused much disturbance, even to Chifone. So, against his will, but at his orders, I was brought back to freedom. In ordinary language, an inheritance from Doris, the disturbance I have mentioned revealed that the balance of our ship was now in danger. So, released from prison to locate the fault, I was restored again to Mima's hall. We plummeted down into the abyss. It sounds like a tall story written in desperate fear in every face, but there was general agreement on this. One could not complain of lack of mass suggestion. A puzzling failure in the gravitation center gave us this sense of falling, the illusion that no matter what we did, we'd keep on falling in one direction, downward, through a void no longer rounded or vaulted, but like a well into which we dived headlong. My Gupta knowledge stood me in good stead, and seldom have I seen people happier than when, helped by the Gupta calculus, within a few hours I could lift the load of fear and sense of endless falling from their hearts. That was a red-letter day among celestial stars. Isegel, my beloved, where are you? Our fame is now assured. The Gupta calculus has scored a triumph. All the fire that used to burn within us derived its light, its soul, from Mima's waves. Never again have we found those scenes which, grouped round Mima, we saw then. Beliefs long preyed upon by time, and impoverished more and more by our own emptiness, are difficult to hold in honor. Continuously uttering their lamentations, the exorcisers stood in Mima's hall, swollen mouths sucking the goddess's blood. Even human sacrifice was reintroduced, though custom had frayed its sanctity with its constant stream of broken oaths. Such sacrifices, however, soon lost their interest for us, since we could find no redemption in sacrificial blood, indifferently offered, which thus meaninglessly flowed away. People who had experienced the scale of the phototurb and known Sjöberg's day of Holocaust in Gond found such offerings here ironically lukewarm, imagined against the red-hot backcloth of Sjöberg's. Even the memory of Mima's days had a significance, and those who knelt in attitudes of prayer, following rites enacted only with a pretense of feeling, were ashamed. Soon, too, the soulless disciples of the cult felt the flow of sacrificial blood grow cold, sensing their own vacuity beside the remains of truth-loving Mima. Thus, in due course, even they refused to assist in the ceremonies commanded by Chifone. What a blow for that autocratic, hardened circus trainer! Now, everyone refusing sacrifice was humbled, for Chifone inflicted hideous punishment. Torn between 4 deadly magnets, every rebel died in nameless agony. From that day on, no one entered the hall where Mima slept, and where the cult had faded, for hope had little chance there against despair, and even Chifone became apprehensive. In illuminated letters on his screen, he published new laws to lessen the strain of our last days. He dressed up gangsters to look like good Samaritans and ordered them to mitigate the effects of penalties. And Chifone himself, now strangely benevolent, was seen quietly mixing healing ointments, and, as though suddenly transformed by magic, helping the sick and caressing the frozen. Death certificate. An evil-minded, baleful self-torturer, a wallower in egoistic sorrows, presided for a time in Mima's hall. At Igol, he had murdered a whole people. Now he was the ruler of those who had come from Doris's valleys. After he had practically devoured himself, leaving only fragments which could not gobble themselves up, he vanished. The very floor on which he used to stand rejoiced. He was called Chiffone from Shashakal. Now I no longer, in this gorge, set up a balance between fact and illusion. No one came now, indeed, to seek for illusion. The facts were all too obvious at last. As though from inside an enormous coffin of crystal, all of us, or nearly all, saw whither we were going, for everywhere there was a window facing horrors, and words of hope could deceive us no longer, and only stars a million miles away peered into that coffin as it glided on, bearing inside it the proud race of Doris. And, as in a morning bell of glass, the clapper of each soul tolled in ecstatic fear against reverberating transparent walls. We crowded close there in Mima's hall. I was squeezed in among the rest. Fear extinguished every memory of Doris. I shared with them the agony of that moment. The leaders could no longer hide from us now the near approach of extermination. Even so, they still tried hard to hide the facts in formulas from our fifth tensor calculus. They refused me admission to the calculus and forbade my entry to the prognoses rooms, but those who have once learned to tell the time can always thereafter foresee the eventide. I went to Mima's grave and fell prostrate, bowed deep in prayer to which God who can tell. I begged in the cold hall in desperation for a miracle to be wrought with inanimate matter. And then, although there was no outward sign, I heard how inanimate things bore witness to a great mystery which was deepened by light from Mima's guttering graveside candles. All thought collapsed, and imagination died at the beginning of the 24th year, crushed by the unending incomprehensibility of heaven's reaches stretching to infinity. All our dreams gave up and finally confessed their humble rank in Gazilnut. Total darkness filled many souls. Lost to reality, they moved about in the halls, vainly questioning each other about the way home and far familiar things, crowding round the lamps as moths do in autumn in the distant plains of Doris. A sorcerer in Mima's hall, I hail all conquerors of bitter cold. I beg the seraphim for their support. I ask that visions may be vouchsafed. I pray that Isagel in this chill hall may rise unscathed from the shell of her urn. Arise, my Isagel, from the ashes of death. Arise, O Isagel, and give me strength. I moved about the halls at a late hour. I shivered that night in Mima's hall, the memory of Doris now freezing cold, and, frozen to all softness, tore my soul. Corrosion penetrated ever deeper into every crevice our dreams tried to preserve, and dust fell like the sand of time itself on tables and on floors in Aniara. So, in the 24th year, the Goldanda traveled with unchecked speed towards the Lyra, and now the distant star of Doris mingled with countless others in a dust storm of stars which seemed to gather in flocks for company, but which in actual fact quivered and hung so sparsely scattered in the eternal cold that each star was a martyr of the void. Quieter, more and more desolate, Aniara became, a proud Goldanda once, now a sarcophagus, which, bereft of her own strength, could only fall along the loxodrome which she retained in falling. The pilot's cabin had long been empty, and former navigators who had worked in the ingenious nose-cone had lain for years now in the quiet place where Daisy Duty slept, entombed, as befits the queen of Jurg, in the center of her court. The halls themselves were hushed, But somewhere in the nooks of the giant capsule, sounds were heard. Walking some 1,000 steps towards this noise, one arrived in the Mima's hall, where, frozen stiff, many space emigrants were sitting still. Absorbed in sorting various forms of death or sleep, they played a game of chess with infinity. Then one of them, who had unobtrusively gone mad, a demagogue, suddenly stood up on a ladder of words and discoursed on the travels of mankind, on Punt and Tyre, Wineland and Da Gama. But rhetoric froze to silence in his mouth, and this last speaker abruptly ceased and stared about him, shuddering in the hall, where life's journey had now gone far further than anything ever dreamt of in the plain of Tajo. Only the echo of death came back in reply to the speech he had made for the fast-dying, who now, in icy rigidity, empty-eyed, peered at the Lyra from our Aniara. There were no longer any lamps to light. A simple lantern burned by Mima's grave, where those still left had gathered now, turning their backs against death's oceans in helpless agony. The final, ebbing hours of human time were lighted by that one flame, and filled with questions. So on the earth many a prisoner has sat beside the lamp of his last lamp, watching its flame and listening as the squad comes marching up to the harsh stone of walls which will soon mirror the flash of firing. For space can never be more cruel than man. More than its match is human callousness. The bleak despair of prison cells on earth builds a deep vault around the souls of men, and chilly stones are heard to mutter dumbly, "Here man is master." So here is Aniara. This was our final night in Mima's hall. Soul after soul broke down and vanished, but before each ego finally dissolved, the soul's will made itself quite clearly felt, finding at last the strength to separate time from the grip of space, and thus to grant oblivion to the race of Doris. I had coveted a paradise for this race, but since we left the one we had destroyed, the zodiac's lonely night became our only home, a gaping chasm in which no god could hear us. The eternal mystery of heaven's stars, the miracle of the celestial mechanism, is the law but not the gospel. Mercy can only thrive where there is life. We failed to grasp the true meaning of the law, and found an empty death in Mima's hall. The god on whom we fixed our final hopes lay wounded on the plains of Doris. I turned the lantern now, enjoining stillness. Our tragedy has ended, but with the right of travelers down the ages, I have told our tale of vision in galactic night. With unabated speed towards the Lyra, the Golconda droned for 15,000 years, like a museum filled with bones and artifacts and dried herbs and roots, relics from Doris's woods. Entombed in our immense sarcophagus, we were borne on across the desolate waves of space night, so unlike the day we'd known, unchallenged silence closing round our grave. By Mima's graveside fallen in a circle, transformed once more to blameless dust we lay, impervious to the sting of bitter stars, lost and dispersed in oceans of nirvana. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.